I probably should have known better than to get caught up in the stealth camping fad. But at the time, it seemed like the perfect way to add some excitement to an otherwise boring cross-country drive. I had been reading about it on different forums and watching videos from people who disappeared into the shadows, blending into city areas for a night without anyone noticing. The idea was tempting: no hotels, no fees, just me and the excitement of the unknown. It was supposed to be simple: drive, sleep, drive some more. I planned to visit a few old friends and then head back home in about 6 days, 3 days driving each way, and I thought breaking the trip up with some stealth camping would make it more interesting. What's life without a little risk, right? I had done my research and marked out some spots that looked quiet enough for a night. I even packed a small camping kit with just the basics. But, as these stories usually go, things didn't work out as planned. My plans took a bad turn the moment I got to that small town later than I expected. It was almost midnight, and I was worn out from driving all day. The route had been easy until I reached the town and saw that the greenbelt I was counting on had been torn down for some new construction. Big machines and dirt piles replaced the thick bushes and trees. I cursed quietly under my breath. I had hoped that spot would be a sure thing, easy to get to, lots of cover, and a low chance of being seen. But now that was impossible. No worries, I told myself. I just needed to stay calm and figure something else out. I drove around for a while, checking dark streets and empty parking lots for another place. Soon, I found what looked like it might work: a dry creek bed between two business areas. It seemed perfect: dark, overgrown with thick bushes, and enough cover to stay out of sight. I parked the car in an out-of-the-way spot behind an old shopping plaza, grabbed my gear, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, and some snacks, and headed toward the creek bed. The farther I went, the more alone it felt. No sane person would wander here at this time, or so I thought. About a quarter mile in, I found a thick patch of bushes. The branches made it hard to see the sky, but it was hidden enough to feel safe. I set up quickly, using my flashlight to check for snakes or other dangers. Everything looked clear, so I laid out my sleeping bag and put my backpack next to me. I relaxed, smoking a joint, taking slow drags while listening to the distant hum of cars, the chirping crickets, and the steady buzz of nearby air conditioners. There was something strangely peaceful about it all. Urban camping under the stars, surrounded by soft sounds of life just out of reach. The weed was kicking in, and I started to drift off. But I didn't sleep for long. I woke up suddenly, heart pounding, unsure what had scared me awake. Then I heard it: crunch, 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 footsteps getting closer and closer. I tensed, trying hard to listen. It wasn't just one person. There were several footsteps. I stayed completely still, barely daring to breathe. From my spot in the bushes, I saw a figure step out, backlit by the faint glow of distant streetlights. It was a man walking a big dog, a pit bull straining at its leash. The dog suddenly stopped, sniffing the air hard, then started pulling its owner toward my hiding spot. Panic filled my chest. There was no way I wasn't going to be found now. I curled up tighter, praying the shadows and bushes would hide me. I could hear the man muttering to the dog, pulling the leash, trying to turn it away. But the dog kept dragging him forward, sniffing the ground like it was tracking something or someone. For what felt like forever, I lay there, muscles tight with fear, heart beating so loud I thought it would burst. Then, finally, the man managed to pull the dog away. "Come on, just leave it," he shouted, dragging the dog back the way they came. Slowly, their footsteps faded into the night. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I was shaking and drenched in sweat. I had a chance to pack up and leave, but I convinced myself it was just a one-time thing. A late-night walker with his dog, nothing serious. My heart settled, and the night went quiet again. The far-off sounds of cars and crickets gave me a false sense of safety. But that was a mistake. As I was about to fall asleep again, a sudden feeling of being watched made me sit up fast. I turned and squinted into the dark, and that's when I saw him. A man standing a few feet away, partly hidden in the shadows. My blood ran cold. He was staring right at me, grinning. His face was dirty, his hair matted, his teeth like yellow jagged shards, with one front tooth shining gold in the dim light. "Nice spot you got here," he rasped, his voice rough like gravel. "You know this is mine, right, buddy?" I was too shocked to answer at first. My brain raced, trying to understand how he had snuck up on me. "I didn't mean to take your spot, man. I'm sorry," I stammered, scrambling to grab my things. "I'll leave, just please." "No, you don't have to go anywhere," he interrupted, stepping closer. "I just want to talk." There was something about the way he said it and how he moved that made my skin crawl. I could feel danger pouring off him like heat from a fire. He was too calm, too sure of himself. I didn't think this was some harmless homeless guy. No, this was someone who meant to hurt me, someone who had probably hurt others before. He reached into his pocket, and my heart skipped. Slowly, he pulled out a knife, a rusty, dirty blade. He held it like it was a toy. "It's pretty dangerous out here at night," he said with that twisted grin never leaving his face. "You never know who you might run into." I didn't wait for him to do anything else. Fight or flight kicked in and I ran. I grabbed what I could, my bag, the flashlight, and bolted through the bushes as fast as possible. Behind me, I heard him laughing, a high-pitched, almost childish giggle. He was chasing me, skipping along like it was some sick game. He hummed an off-key, eerie tune that sent chills down my spine. I ran like crazy, adrenaline flooding me, lungs burning, aiming for where I'd parked the car. I could hear him getting closer, footsteps light and quick behind me. The creek bed was full of shadows and debris. I stumbled more than once, nearly falling face first into the gravel, but I kept going, driven by pure terror. When I finally reached the bridge, I glanced back, and he was gone, vanished into the darkness as if he'd never been there. I didn't stop to think. I scrambled up the slope, jumped in the car, and sped away without looking back. It wasn't until I was miles away, still shaking, that I finally let myself breathe. My hands were trembling. My mind raced with endless what-ifs. What if he had caught me? What if I hadn't woken up in time? What if he was still out there, waiting for someone else to walk into his twisted game? I shuddered at the memory of that crooked knife. I had never been so glad to see a highway sign glow. I kept driving until the sun started coming up, until I was far, far away from that cursed place. I didn't stop until I found a busy truck stop, surrounded by the safe noise of people, lights, and civilization. Stealth camping? Never again. I'd take a cheap motel over that nightmare in the dark any day. Whatever thrill I thought I'd get wasn't worth the danger I barely escaped. To this day, whenever I hear a faint, creepy tune, it takes me right back to that night. The man with the knife and that horrible grin lurking in the shadows. Ella and I had been sneaking around camping spots since our college years when adventures were cheaper than hotel stays and much more exciting. Over time, we got better at slipping into quiet patches of woods and forgotten fields. It became our usual way to travel light, save money, and collect stories to tell. Honestly, the scariest thing we'd encountered before was just a curious raccoon trying to raid our food stash. We took pride in being smart, cautious, and most importantly, unnoticed. But there was one night that still sends a chill down my spine whenever I think about it. We were on a road trip through the Northwest, hoping to visit as many parks and forests as we could. Our days were filled with hiking paths, relaxing by lakes, and enjoying nature. At night, we'd pick a quiet spot to set up camp. This night was no different. We pulled into a small town that seemed stuck in the past. Rows of old shops, a lone gas station, and weathered houses leaning under the weight of time. It was late August, warm and dry, with a sky clear and full of stars. Ella suggested checking out a public park at the edge of town. From the road, it looked just right. Lots of trees, a small creek flowing through it, and best of all, no one else around. We parked in a gravel lot by the park entrance, grabbed our hammocks, and followed a narrow path running next to the creek. The trail took us to a tiny clearing surrounded by tall fir trees. The branches were thick enough to block out most light, coloring everything in dark blues and black shadows. The only sign that people had been there was a crooked wooden fence, half-rotted and covered in vines, barely visible through the trees. It seemed to mark the edge of someone's land, but there were no lights and no house nearby, so we didn't worry. We found a spot a little off the path, set up our hammocks, and settled in for a quiet night beneath the stars. We had a quick cold meal, some sandwiches and fruit, then lay back in the bigger hammock, watching the night sky through gaps in the branches. The only sounds were the gentle bubbling of the creek, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was peaceful. We'd done this so many times that sneaking around camping spots felt natural. At some point, we must have fallen asleep because I woke up in the dark, my first thought that I'd heard something. A soft noise that felt out of place. I stayed very still and listened, but all I could hear were the normal sounds of night. Just as I was about to tell myself it was nothing, Ella shifted beside me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, though I hadn't caught anything clear. Her voice was tight, the kind of whisper that puts your nerves on edge. "What is it?" I asked, barely daring to breathe. "I've been hearing footsteps for a while," she said. That snapped me fully awake. I strained to listen and caught a faint shuffling sound, almost like slow dragging feet. It was deliberate, not like an animal. My heart started pounding as I scanned the dark trees around us. The branches cast long shadows that moved with every breeze. Then, in the faint moonlight through the trees, I saw a figure stumbling between the trunks. It was an older woman, her hair tangled and wild, her clothes hanging loose like torn fabric. She moved oddly, sometimes stepping forward, then suddenly doubling back. Her arms hung limp at her sides. At first, I thought maybe she was lost or confused, someone who'd wandered off nearby. But her movements were jerky and strange, almost like she was being pulled by invisible strings. We didn't make a sound, just lay there watching as she stumbled closer. Her face was hard to see in the low light. I held my breath, hoping she'd pass by and leave us alone. Instead, she stopped near a big tree, looked around nervously, and crouched down as if trying to hide. She pressed herself against the trunk and stayed completely still. Then we lost sight of her. The silence afterward was heavy and suffocating. My mind raced trying to understand what we'd just seen. Who was she? Why was she here in the middle of the night acting like that? And most of all, where was she now? I couldn't shake the feeling she was still close by, just out of sight, watching us. Minutes passed like hours. The tension in the air was almost like a thick weight. Ella's grip tightened on my arm. I could tell she was just as scared as I was. Neither of us wanted to move until we were sure the woman was gone. Then suddenly, there was more movement, this time louder and heavier. Two men appeared, walking out from the deeper woods like they knew exactly where they were headed. They wore rough, dark clothes, and their heavy steps made my stomach twist with dread. They weren't out for a simple walk. They were hunting for something or someone. Ella and I huddled together, barely daring to peek over the edge of our hammock. The men stopped near the tree where the woman had hidden. I heard them muttering urgently, like they were arguing. One motion toward the tree. Then, without warning, they started beating the bushes, kicking at the brush, all while whispering harshly. I clapped my hand over my mouth, terrified I might make a sound. Finally, after what felt like forever, one barked an order and the woman crawled out from her hiding spot. Up close, she looked even more fragile, trembling as she tried to stand. One man grabbed her arm, pulling her roughly upright. She wobbled, barely able to keep steady. They seemed completely indifferent to her. One dusted dirt off her clothes, and then another slapped her hard enough to make her stumble. She didn't cry out, only flinched and kept her head down. "Keep her in sight this time," one snapped, his voice harsh and cruel, sending chills down my spine. They forced her to walk between them as they marched back toward the edge of the park. Before they left, they scanned the area, their eyes sweeping over the trees, bushes, and us. I felt their gaze like a sharp blade even from where we were hidden, searching, making sure no one was watching. Finally, their eyes landed on our hammock. I thought my heart would stop. They whispered to each other, staring at our hiding spot, and for a terrifying moment, I thought they might come check it out. But after a short exchange, they shrugged and walked away, dragging the woman into the shadows. We stayed frozen, barely daring to breathe, until we were sure they were gone. My mind swirled with endless questions, none with good answers. Who were those men? What were they doing with that woman? Why were they out here at night dragging her like that? The moment they disappeared, Ella and I scrambled to pack up our camp, our hands shaking as we hurried. We didn't speak or turn on any lights. I kept expecting them to return and find us. My chest was tight with fear, breath quick and shallow. I had never felt so exposed and helpless. We raced back to the trail, the night suddenly feeling dangerous instead of calm. When we got to our car, Ella fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before unlocking the door. We jumped in, locked the doors, and sped away like something was chasing us. Only halfway down the highway did we dare to talk about what happened. We agreed we had to report it. I wasn't sure what to expect when I called the local police, but their reply was cold and uninterested. The dispatcher took our info, said someone would come check it out, but that was it. No follow-up, no questions. I got the feeling they weren't shocked by what we said, like it was just another case they'd already heard before. We didn't stick around to wait. We kept driving until we reached a small town and found a cheap motel. That night, we lay awake, replaying everything over and over, trying to make sense of it. But the more we thought about it, the more disturbing it became. The woman's empty eyes, her puppet-like jerky movements, the cruelty of those men. It was a nightmare that felt all too real. It wasn't just the strangeness of what we saw that haunted us, but the terrible questions. What if we hadn't stayed quiet? What if we'd tried to help? Or even just made ourselves known? Those men clearly weren't helping her. They were controlling her somehow. Who knows what they planned or how many others they'd hurt. The thought of being caught in their grip made my skin crawl. The next morning, the sun shone bright like nothing was wrong, but the fear stayed with us. We packed quietly, the radio playing softly but failing to lift the heavy mood. Ella finally broke the silence. "Do you think it was some kind of trafficking?" she asked quietly. I shrugged, not sure. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe something worse." The image of the woman's hollow eyes and those cruel men stayed with me. Ella's fingers tapped nervously on the steering wheel. "What worries me more," she said, "is that they saw us. They knew we were there, but they didn't care." I shivered. It was true. Their indifference was chilling. They'd made eye contact with us, seen us, and then just walked away, as if sure we wouldn't do anything or that it wouldn't matter if we did. We drove on in silence, the weight of that night pressing down. The bright morning sun felt like a cruel joke against the fear we carried. We stopped at a small diner for breakfast. The place was normal, friendly staff, quiet chatter, a strange escape from what we'd been through. Ella and I exchanged looks but didn't say much. The waitress's warm smile felt like a When I was 19 and still pretty inexperienced, a few friends and I decided to bike from Chicago to San Francisco. We started around the end of August and ended up in the Southwest during autumn, where most tourist spots were already closed for the season. We didn't follow any famous trails, just kind of made it up as we went, using road maps we picked up every time we crossed into a new state. Each day, we chose a town to meet at, then headed out on our own schedule, planning to find a place to camp by nightfall. One day, after spending the previous night camping, we planned to meet in a town about 50 miles away, though I can't remember the exact name. There wasn't much between where we started and that town, so we hoped to find a diner or at least a small store when we arrived. That's one of the risks of stealth camping. You never know what you'll find, if anything at all. Will there be a gas station? Will someone spot us? Could we get into trouble? Might someone steal our stuff? The ride itself went smoothly, and we all gathered in the town. But to our surprise, the entire place was deserted. It was completely empty, nothing was open, and we didn't see a single person. It felt like the whole town had been shut down and left to decay. While riding around, we eventually found an old, rundown bar. It seemed like a good idea at the time to bring our bikes inside and camp there for the night. After all, it looked like no one would notice or care since there didn't seem to be anyone around for miles. As we started moving our bikes inside, we heard a voice behind us. "What are you boys doing here?" It was deep and unexpected. When we turned around, There was a tall man wearing a worn-out cowboy hat, looking at us with curiosity. We quickly explained we were biking across the country, thought the bar was empty, and asked if we could stay there for the night. We weren't exactly scared of him. It was more the realization that we were clearly trespassing in the middle of nowhere, Arizona. The man listened, nodded, and said, "Wait here." Then he drove off, leaving us pretty worried. But since we had nowhere else to go, we waited as he said, wondering what might happen next. The situation felt strange, almost like a scene from a scary movie. About 10 minutes later, the man came back with a shorter guy and a big dog, a pit bull. At first, we felt nervous, but they introduced themselves. I don't remember their names, but I'll never forget the dog's name. It was Rocky. The shorter man owned the bar, and they said they were there to invite some friends over for a small get-together. Before long, they pulled out a cooler filled with beer and steaks. The party started, and we found ourselves eating free food, drinking free beer, and hanging out with some rough-looking locals. What started as a creepy encounter turned into one of the best nights of the trip in about 15 minutes. As the night went on, we switched from beer to whiskey and got pretty drunk. The locals joked about how we wouldn't be able to ride our bikes the next day, which seemed hilarious to us at the time. The party went on late, around 2 a.m., when the cowboy said he needed to close the bar. We helped clean up a bit and settled down on the floor to sleep. The others left, and the bar owner locked up before heading out, saying he'd be back in the morning. We fell into a deep sleep, completely wiped out from all the drinking. Sometime later, I woke to a strange shaking beneath me. I thought one of my friends had gotten up to use the bathroom, but when I looked around, everyone was still asleep. Then I heard footsteps, boots scraping on the floor. None of us had been wearing shoes. "Hello," I called out. The cowboy answered, and before I knew it, a flashlight shone right in my face, blinding me. As I tried to sit up, I saw he was naked except for his cowboy hat and boots. My friend, startled, asked what was going on. Sure enough, the man was standing there completely naked and obviously drunk. I glanced at my watch. It had only been about an hour since we had fallen asleep. The guy had come back in a drunken state, stripped down, and for reasons none of us wanted to figure out, was just standing there like that. "Come on, let's have some fun, boys," he slurred. We freaked out, grabbed our stuff as fast as we could, and ran for the door. Thankfully, he was too drunk to chase us properly. We rushed outside to his truck, which was parked with the engine running and the door open. We threw our gear over our backs and biked away as fast as possible. Though we weren't moving super quickly with our bags falling off and still feeling tipsy ourselves, we made it about a mile out of town before we stumbled on an empty barn. The barn was falling apart, full of old hay and rusty farming tools, but we hid our bikes and climbed into the rafters to sleep for a few hours. At dawn, we heard a truck driving on the dirt road outside. It was probably the same guy, maybe looking for us. We waited until the truck was gone, then quickly packed up and left. For the rest of the trip, we did our best to avoid any more encounters like that. It was late August when my partner and I decided to go camping one final time before the weather turned cold. I had a lot of camping gear left over from when I used to go with friends back in college, so I thought it would be a great chance to use it again. There was a quiet spot we liked to visit, not an official campground, just a hidden place we found once before. I figured it would be perfect to show my partner. When we got there, we noticed an old fire ring and some scattered trash, clear signs that others had found the spot too. We didn't mind though. We set up our tent and started a fire. For hours, we sat around it, talking and enjoying a few drinks. Around 2 a.m., we were shocked by the sudden sound of what sounded exactly like a chainsaw starting up. At first, we thought maybe someone was cutting down a tree, but it made no sense for anyone to be doing that so late at night. Then out of nowhere, a strange laugh followed the noise. That really scared us. We quickly put out the fire and got inside the tent. The noise seemed far away, so we felt somewhat safe, and we had a hunting knife with us just in case. But over the next few minutes, the sounds appeared to be getting closer. Thankfully, after a while, the noise stopped suddenly, and we both relaxed. After about half an hour of silence, We thought it might be safe enough to try to sleep. Surprisingly, we fell asleep quickly, probably helped by the drinks we had earlier. I don't know what time it was, but something woke me up in the night. At first, I didn't know why, but then I heard footsteps. I sat up quietly and saw that my partner was already awake too. We looked at each other and listened carefully. The footsteps were many, and they sounded very close, no more than 15 yards away. My partner wanted to run to the car, but I told her to wait a little longer. The moonlight was bright that night, and I could see shadows moving on the side of the tent. 3 figures walking around outside. I didn't tell her because I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. Quietly, I grabbed the knife, preparing myself for whatever might happen. Time seemed to stretch, but finally the shadows began to move away. As soon as they left, I told my partner it was time to go. We left everything behind, unzipped the tent, and ran to the car as fast as we could. I was thankful we had a remote starter on the car. I had it running by the time we jumped in, and I hit the gas without looking back. Once we were safely driving away, I told her about the figures I'd seen outside. She was angry that I hadn't said anything sooner. We spent the night at a motel instead. The next morning, we went back to the campsite. Everything we had left was gone. Every single thing. I still don't know what really happened that night. Maybe we accidentally camped on someone's private land, and this was their way of scaring us off. Or maybe those people had worse plans. Either way, they now have all our camping gear. I don't think we'll be camping again anytime soon. Early mornings when the cold wasn't too biting and the Pine Ridge Trail was covered in shades of yellow, orange, and red. My job had been tough lately and I needed to clear my mind. I had heard about this trail. Quiet, peaceful, and a bit hard to hike. It wasn't popular, which was exactly what I wanted. I parked my truck in a gravel parking area near the trailhead, checked my supplies, and made sure my water bottle, snacks, and first aid kit were packed well in my bag. I downloaded the trail map on my phone, though I had a paper copy as backup, but I didn't think I would need it. The route was a loop about 7.5 miles long with some moderate climbs. The air smelled fresh, a mix of wet earth and fallen leaves. Birds chirped above, like a song of freedom. The path began easy, a soft dirt track weaving gently between tall trees. My boots crunched the leaves as I walked, and with every step, some of the tension I'd been carrying for weeks eased. After about 20 minutes, I saw a wooden sign pointing left, deeper into the woods. This was the start of the loop. I chose to go clockwise, thinking the steep parts would come later, once I was warmed up. The trail got narrower the deeper I went. The trees grew close together, and the sunlight barely passed through the thick branches. I didn't see any other hikers, which wasn't surprising since this trail was pretty remote. It wasn't creepy yet. I enjoyed the quietness. About an hour later, I reached a small open space where the trees broke apart, revealing a gentle stream trickling over stones. I stopped to refill my water bottle using the filter I brought. Sitting on a big rock, I took a moment to enjoy the peaceful view. The only sounds were the gentle water flow and leaves rustling in the breeze. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. A faint footprint in the mud near the stream. But it wasn't from hiking boots or running shoes like you'd expect here. It was bare, a human foot bigger than mine with the edges a little smeared like the person had slipped. I stood up and looked around but didn't see anything unusual. Maybe someone had gone barefoot, I thought. It felt odd, though, given the rocky, cold ground and the time of year. Walking barefoot in mud like that made me uneasy. Still, I told myself people do strange things. The trail then climbed steeper. The trees here were older, their trunks thick and twisted, moss covering the bark. The ground was rough with roots and rocks. My legs burned as I climbed, but it felt good, like I was testing myself. I kept a steady pace, stopping now and then for a sip of water or to tighten my backpack straps. Another hour went by, maybe more. I was deep into the loop, far from the trailhead. The forest got quieter, even the birds seemed to vanish. The only sounds were my footsteps crunching leaves and my heavier breathing from the climb. That's when I heard it, a faint, almost steady sound behind me. At first, I thought it was just the echo of my own steps, but when I stopped, the noise didn't stop. I quickly turned to look back down the trail. Nothing, just trees, shadows, and soft sunlight filtering through the leaves. I stood still for a moment listening. The sound stopped. "Relax," I whispered to myself. "It's easy for your mind to trick you when you're alone in the woods." I kept walking, but I was now very alert, every sound seeming louder. My footsteps sounded heavier, the rustling leaves sharper. I tried to focus ahead, but my ears were ready for anything unusual. About 15 minutes later, I saw it again, another footprint. This one was clearer, pressed into a damp patch just off the path. It was definitely barefoot, toes spread wide, like whoever made it was grabbing the ground to hold on. The mud around it looked disturbed, as if the foot had dragged a little. My chest tightened. I didn't like this. I wasn't scared exactly, but my gut told me something was wrong. I glanced behind me again. Nothing. I told myself maybe it was an old footprint, but I knew it couldn't be. It had rained 2 nights ago, and this print was too fresh to have lasted through that. I picked up my pace. The trail grew even steeper, winding through rocky terrain covered in loose gravel. My boots slipped a few times and I grabbed nearby trees to keep balance. My breathing was ragged now, not just from the hard climb but also from the growing unease inside me. Then I heard it again. This time it wasn't just footsteps. There was a clear snap of a small branch to my left. My heart jumped and I froze, trying to listen. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the pounding of my pulse in my ears. "Hello," I called out before I could stop myself. My voice felt small, swallowed up by the trees. No answer. I forced myself to keep going, but my legs felt heavy, like the air around me was pressing down. Every instinct screamed that I wasn't alone. The path started going down now, leading into a thick area where trees stood so close it felt like dusk even in daylight. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. My head moved quickly, scanning the bushes for any sign of movement, but I saw nothing. Then I noticed something else. A sharp smell, sour and metallic, like rust or blood. I gagged and pulled my jacket collar over my nose, but the smell stuck in the air. I tried to think it was just a dead animal, something left by a predator. But why hadn't I seen anything? The loop was supposed to take about 4 hours, but I wasn't sure how long I had been out. My phone's GPS was acting up, and I had no signal. I stopped trying to check the map and focused on moving forward, hoping to find the next marker. Soon I saw a clearing up ahead. Relief flooded me. Maybe if I could get out of the trees for a bit, I'd feel less tense. But as I stepped into the clearing, my heart sank. In the center was a small, worn tent that looked like it had been there for weeks, maybe longer. The fabric was stained, torn, and sagging in. Around it, the ground was covered in trash. Empty cans, ripped clothes, and something that made my stomach turn. A small, bloody knife. I stepped back instinctively, my breathing shallow. The smell was stronger here, almost unbearable. My eyes searched the clearing for any movement but saw nothing. I didn't want to stay. Whatever had happened here, I didn't want to be involved. I turned back to the trail, picking up my pace into a near run. My legs ached, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The forest felt darker now, the air heavier. Every shadow seemed to flicker, every sound was louder. Then I saw it. A figure ahead on the trail, standing still, partly hidden by trees. I couldn't see details, only the shape of a person, tall and broad-shouldered. My throat tightened. I stepped back, and my boots crushed the leaves loudly. The figure turned. It wasn't their face that scared me. I couldn't see it clearly. It was the way they moved, slow and purposeful, like they had all the time in the world. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran. My lungs burned. My legs screamed, but I didn't stop. The trail blurred around me as I focused only on putting distance between me and whatever was behind me. Finally, I saw the trailhead. I burst out of the forest, chest heaving. My truck was still there, a safe spot in the empty parking lot. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The forest stood behind me, silent and still. I never went back to that trail. I reported the abandoned campsite to local rangers, but I never heard what they found, or if they found anything at all. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there, but every time I step into the woods, I feel like I'm being watched. After a rough few days at work, I picked a spot without much thought. A wooded area about 3 hours outside of town. It was far enough from the city to get some calm, but not so far that it felt unsafe. I wasn't much of an explorer, really. I wasn't planning anything wild, just a peaceful walk through the woods. The trail I chose was rated moderate, which seemed just right. The air felt fresh as I parked my car in a small gravel lot near the trailhead. No other vehicles were there, which didn't surprise me since it was a weekday and most people were probably tied up with jobs or chores. I liked being alone. It was exactly what I needed. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, mild temperature, and a soft breeze that carried the smell of pine and dirt. I packed light, a small backpack with water, a snack bar, and my phone. I left behind anything extra. The trail was well marked, and I figured I'd be back in a few hours. After locking my car and double-checking my gear, I set out. The first half hour was calm and peaceful, the kind of calm that felt good. The forest was alive with birds singing and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. The path was narrow but clear, with some roots and stones here and there, keeping me alert where I stepped. I drifted into my thoughts, letting the steady sound of my footsteps and the scenery soothe me. As I went further, the trail started to climb gently and led deeper into the woods. The trees grew taller and closer, their branches twisting together to form a canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft spots on the ground. It felt a little darker here, but not scary, just more hidden away. I hadn't seen another person, which was odd because this wasn't some secret path. It was listed on several popular hiking apps. Maybe I just picked a quiet time. I shrugged and kept going. About an hour in, the mood changed. At first, I couldn't tell exactly why. The forest felt quieter. The bird song I'd heard earlier had stopped, and even the leaves rustling was softer. I paused to take a sip of water and listened. The silence felt heavy, almost strange. I shook it off. Probably nothing. Maybe I'd scared off some animals without knowing it. I adjusted my backpack and kept moving, but the uneasy feeling stayed. Not long after, I spotted something odd. The ground looked disturbed in places. Dirt was dug up, and clumps of grass were pulled out. At first, I thought wild animals might have been there, but the marks didn't look like paws or claws. They were strange, long, narrow scratches, like something dragged across the earth. I crouched down to look closer. The grooves were deep, overlapping and crossing each other, like whatever made them had struggled here. A chill ran down my spine, and I stood quickly, glancing around. The forest seemed thicker now, the trees towering and packed close. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. I moved on, trying to ignore the unease. The trail got steeper and rougher, forcing me to watch my step. My breathing got heavier, and my legs began to ache, but I didn't want to stop. Something about the silence behind me felt wrong, like it was pushing me forward. Then I saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a dark figure standing about 40 yards ahead, partly hidden by trees. My heart jumped. I froze, squinting to make out what it was. It didn't move. I tried to convince myself it was a person, maybe another hiker, but it was too tall and the shape looked strange. Its shoulders were wide, and the arms hung down too long. It wore no clothes I could see, and its skin or fur was dark, blending into the shadows. My mind scrambled for answers, a bear, maybe, or a trick of the light. But bears don't stand like that. The more I looked, the clearer it became that this was no animal I'd ever seen. I took a slow step back, my boots crunching softly on the gravel. The noise felt loud in the quiet. Then the figure moved. It tilted its head, like it had heard me, and stepped forward. The motion was smooth, almost human, but heavy, like it was hunting. My stomach twisted as I caught sight of its face, or what I thought was a face. A long snout, sharp ears, and eyes that shone unnaturally in the dim light. It looked like a nightmare. a huge wolf standing on two legs, too big and deliberate in its movements. I didn't think. I turned and ran. The trail blurred beneath my feet as I sprinted downhill, my backpack bouncing. My breaths were ragged, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I heard it behind me, heavy steps crashing through bushes, faster than any person could run. I didn't dare look back. All I could focus on was the trail, staying on my feet, and moving as fast as I could. Roots and rocks seemed to jump out at me. I stumbled more than once, barely catching myself. The forest felt endless. My legs burned, and my lungs screamed for air, but I couldn't stop. The sound behind me was too close, too relentless. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, and sometimes I thought I heard a low growl that made my blood run cold. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, but was probably just minutes. My body was close to giving out when I saw a clearing ahead. Sunlight spilled through, brighter and more welcome than anything I'd ever seen. The parking lot, my car. I had made it. With the last of my strength, I sprinted to the clearing, pulling my keys out as I ran. My hands shook so much I almost dropped them, but I managed to unlock the door and throw myself inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. For a moment, there was silence. Then, at the edge of the woods, it appeared again. It stood just at the tree line, its head tilted, watching me. Even from this distance, I could see the sharp intelligence in its eyes. It didn't come closer, but it didn't leave either. It just watched. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I started the car, the engine roaring, and sped away, gravel flying behind me. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back where things felt safe. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that thing haunted me every time I closed my eyes. I searched online for hours trying to find an answer, but nothing fit. The closest were stories about dog-like creatures that people say live in remote places. I'd always thought those were just myths. Now, I'm not so sure. I haven't gone hiking since. The thought of walking back into the woods fills me with dread. Maybe someday I'll find the courage, but for now, I'm okay staying where it's safe, where the shadows don't seem to hide secrets. Whatever I saw that day, it was real, and it's still out there. I had always loved hiking. There's something about the quiet in nature, the steady crunch of dirt beneath my boots. I had been getting ready for this walk for several weeks. It wasn't anything hard, just a quiet path through the woods near a small group of hills about 2 hours from where I live. The plan was simple: park the car, hike up to the ridge, then circle back before sunset. I wasn't a pro at hiking, but I knew enough to handle myself. My backpack was packed with water, snacks, a small first aid kit, a flashlight, and a light jacket. The weather was supposed to be clear, a crisp fall day with no rain expected. I got to the trailhead in the late morning. The parking lot was empty, which wasn't surprising for this time of year. Most folks stayed away once the cold set in. I didn't mind the quiet. In fact, I liked it. It felt like a chance to get away from the noise of everyday life and just breathe. The trail began wide and easy to follow, lined with tall pine trees on both sides. Their needles blanketed the ground, softening my steps. The air was cool but not biting, the kind of crispness that wakes you up and makes you feel alive. I walked steadily, enjoying the steady crunch of leaves beneath me and the occasional scurry of squirrels darting through the bushes. About an hour later, I reached a small open spot where the trees cleared, revealing a view of the valley below. I stopped to take it in, leaning against a big rock and taking a sip from my water bottle. The sun felt warm on my face, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. It was one of those times that make you feel lucky just to be alive. After the clearing, the trail got narrower and climbed uphill through thicker woods. I had to watch my footing as the path grew uneven with roots sticking out and loose stones. I kept an eye out for trail markers, small patches of paint on trees or rocks, to make sure I didn't stray. It wasn't the kind of trail where you'd expect to get lost, but I didn't want to take chances. Around 2 hours in, I made it to the ridge. The view was even better than I had imagined. The forest spread out for miles, a mix of reds, oranges, and greens, with another mountain range faintly visible far off in the distance. I sat on a flat rock and pulled out a granola bar, savoring the quiet as I ate. There was no wind, just the faint call of birds talking to each other in the trees. It felt like I was the only person in the world. But as I sat, a strange feeling began to creep in. It was small at first, a tiny prickling at the back of my neck. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the stillness playing tricks on me. But the feeling didn't fade. I scanned the tree line, searching for any movement, but everything was still, too still. Even the birds had stopped singing. I stood up and brushed off my pants. It was time to head back. The loop trail was supposed to take me down the other side of the ridge and back to the parking lot. I checked the map on my phone to confirm the way, then started moving. The uneasy feeling stayed with me, quietly gnawing at my thoughts as I walked down. The trail grew steeper and harder to follow. The markers were farther apart, and some were so faded I could barely see them. I had to stop several times to double-check the path. The trees seemed to crowd in closer, their branches making a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. The air felt heavier here, colder. Then I saw the footprints. At first, I thought they were mine somehow doubled back, but looking closer, I realized they weren't. They were bigger than my own, and the pattern on the soles was different. Someone else had been here recently, heading the same way I was. The prints were fresh enough that the edges were still sharp, not blurred by wind or rain. I told myself it was no big deal, it was a public trail after all. But the thought of someone else being out here without me seeing them made my stomach tighten. I quickened my steps, wanting to put more space between me and whoever had made those tracks. The trail bent sharply left, and as I rounded the curve, something stopped me in my tracks. A pile of stones stacked carefully in the middle of the path. It wasn't natural, someone had arranged them. I stared at it, heart pounding. Was it just a marker left by a hiker or something else? A warning, maybe? I didn't want to hang around and find out. I stepped around the pile, eyes flicking over my shoulder as I moved. The uneasy feeling had turned into full-blown anxiety, a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I kept going faster than before, my eyes darting at every shadow and movement in the trees. Then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. A branch snapping, loud and close. I froze and listened. The forest was silent again, but the noise was real. It wasn't the light snap a squirrel or bird would make. This had weight behind it, like someone or something had stepped down hard. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing, just endless trunks and shadows. I waited, straining my ears for any sign of movement, but the silence pressed down on me like a heavy weight. I wanted to call out, to demand whoever was there show themselves, but my throat was dry and tight. Instead, I turned and started moving again, walking just fast enough to nearly jog. The trail leveled out briefly before dropping again, but the markers became even harder to find. I had to stop many times to look for them, my worry growing with every pause. The light was fading faster than I expected. The sun slipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Then I saw it, a second pile of stones, bigger and more carefully stacked than the first. It sat just off the path but seemed meant to be noticed. My heart thundered in my ears as I stared at it. This wasn't normal. Someone was out here leaving these signs, and I had no clue why. I pushed onward, my thoughts racing. Was it just a prank? Some bored kids messing around? Or was it something worse? The thought of being watched and followed made my skin crawl. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone step out of the trees. The trail became nearly impossible to follow as the light faded. I had to use my flashlight to see the ground. The beam cut through the darkness ahead of me. The woods felt alive now. Every rustle of leaves or crack of a branch sent my nerves into overdrive. Then, up ahead, something made me stop dead. A backpack leaning against a tree. It looked old and dirty, the fabric worn and torn in places. I moved closer slowly, the flashlight shaking in my hand. There was no one nearby, no sign of who left it. Seeing it filled me with dread. Why would someone leave their pack here? I didn't touch it. I didn't want to know what was inside. Instead, I went around it and kept moving, my steps quickening. The trail seemed endless, the trees closing in tighter with every step. I felt like I was being funneled, pushed deeper into the woods. Finally, I saw the parking lot through the trees. Relief washed over me as I stumbled out of the forest onto the gravel road, my legs trembling. My car was the only one there, just like I'd left it. I threw my backpack into the back seat and climbed in, locking the doors behind me. As I drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone step out of the woods into the lot. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the darkening sky. It wasn't until I was many miles down the highway that I finally let myself relax. Whatever had happened out there, I was safe now. But the uneasy feeling stayed, a shadow in the back of my mind. I didn't know who or what had been out there with me, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. One thing was clear: I wouldn't be hiking alone again anytime soon. I had been preparing for this hike for weeks. It was one of those late autumn days. This happened when I was in 7th grade during the summer. My parents signed me up for a boys-only camp that lasted about 4 weeks. The camp was tucked deep inside a forest with around 6 small cabins spread out. Nearby there was a pond, some fire pits, and if I remember right, even a sandy volleyball area. The camp was roughly a 5-hour drive from the city. It was old and a bit run down, but still used for summer programs. When we arrived, I unpacked my things in one of the cabins and set up my sleeping spot. A few of the boys I'd be staying with wanted to explore the woods before dinner time. The camp rules were loose. We could wander as far as we wanted as long as we could still see the cabins. While we were walking, one of the boys noticed a figure in the distance. It was an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a little ways off and staring in our direction. He looked messy, like he hadn't cleaned up in a long time. His clothes were grimy and he had a scruffy gray beard. We just figured he was part of the camp staff. He gave us a weird smile and I awkwardly waved back. Later that night, we told one of the camp leaders about him. The counselor seemed to take it seriously and went to check out the area. By then, the man was gone. For the next few days, we didn't go deep into the woods again. We were all a little shaken. Most of the counselors were teenagers or young adults, no older than 25, and it became clear they didn't know who the man was. Then, on the 4th night, things got worse. I woke up to the sound of the cabin door handle rattling. Every night around 11 p.m., one of the counselors would knock on the doors to remind us to lock up and go to bed. I thought that's what was happening, but I didn't have a watch, so I wasn't sure what time it was. Being the only one awake, I yelled that we were already in bed. Right after that, a flashlight turned on outside and the beam started moving across the cabin windows. Someone was trying to look inside. A few other boys started waking up, and I signaled for them to stay quiet and low. The person outside circled the cabin multiple times, shining the light through every window. I don't know if they saw me, but I felt the beam pass over me more than once. After what felt like forever, the flashlight switched off and everything went quiet again. I told the others what had happened. One of the boys had a watch and checked the time. It was 3:30 a.m., way too late for a counselor to be out there. We stayed awake until morning when a teenage counselor came around to wake us up for breakfast. We told him everything and he took us to the adult counselors. We repeated our story. What they told us next was chilling. That same night, a boy from another cabin had gone out to use the bathroom. On his way back, he saw someone near one of the cabin doors. At first, he thought it was a counselor, but then he noticed the person was trying to pick the lock. When asked to describe the man, the boy said it was dark, but he remembered the man had a beard and was wearing dirty clothes. It sounded exactly like the man we had seen on the first day. The camp was immediately closed for safety reasons. That afternoon, a bus came and took all of us home. Years later, I looked up some information about what happened. After we left, the police searched the area and found a small tent hidden nearby. Inside, they discovered basic camping gear and hundreds of Polaroid pictures of the camp. Pictures of the cabins, the pond, the fire pits, and most disturbingly, photos of the kids. Many of the pictures were taken from far away, and some were shot at night through the cabin windows. The police waited for someone to come back to the tent, but no one ever showed up. The man was never found. Back at the trailhead, I had been walking most of the day, following a path that wound through thick woods before finally opening up to a breathtaking view of the valley below. It was the kind of hike that was tough but worth it, and I felt glad I had pushed myself to reach that spot. The air was cool and fresh, the kind of weather that makes you feel truly awake. Coming down was always the hardest part for me. By then, I was tired, and every step felt a bit shaky. The trail was narrow, with steep drops on one side and a dense wall of trees on the other. As daylight faded, the woods around me changed. The shadows grew longer, the leaves rustled louder, and every snap of a twig underfoot made me suddenly very aware of how alone I was. I wasn't scared, though. I had done this hike many times before and knew the path well. Still, something about the forest felt different that evening. There was a strange tension in the air I couldn't quite explain. I told myself it was just my imagination and kept going. About halfway down, I noticed something odd. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping birds, the buzzing insects, had completely stopped. It was so quiet it felt unnatural, like stepping into an empty space. My footsteps on the gravel path suddenly seemed incredibly loud. I paused, trying to figure out what was going on. Maybe there was a predator nearby, a mountain lion or a bear. Those animals weren't uncommon in this area, and I'd heard the best thing to do was to make noise and keep moving. So that's what I did. But the silence felt strange, heavier than just quiet. It felt like the air itself was pressing down on me. Trying to shake off the feeling, I picked up my pace. Then I saw something ahead on the trail. At first, I thought it was another hiker, maybe someone coming up late in the day. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a person. It was low to the ground, almost like an animal, but its movements were wrong, jerky and unnatural, like it was flickering in and out of place. My heart started beating fast. I couldn't see many details in the fading light, but the shape was enough to make my stomach twist. It was very tall, too tall, and its limbs were long and thin, bending in strange ways that didn't seem possible. I stopped, unsure what to do. My instincts told me to turn and run, but I didn't want to make sudden moves. Maybe it hadn't noticed me yet. Maybe if I stayed still, it would go away. Then it turned its head, or what I thought was its head, and pale, glowing eyes locked onto me, faintly shining in the dark. My breath caught. It wasn't just looking. It was studying me like a hunter eyeing its prey. Suddenly, it moved toward me quickly. I didn't think, I just ran. The trail was steep and uneven, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the brush, moving fast. Its footsteps were heavy and close. My lungs burned and my legs screamed, but I couldn't slow down. Every part of me knew stopping was not an option. The path twisted and turned, and I prayed the creature would lose me in the thick trees. I glanced back and immediately regretted it. It was closer than I thought, moving on all fours now, its limbs bending in unnatural ways to move faster. Its pale eyes glowed brighter, cutting through the dark like lights. I pushed myself harder, keeping my eyes on the trail. The forest blurred around me. I almost fell several times but caught myself just in time. My mind raced to come up with a plan. There was a small clearing about a quarter-mile ahead where the trail split in two. Maybe if I could reach it, I could hide or double back and lose it. The clearing felt like it took forever to reach. When I finally burst into it, I didn't stop. I veered left, taking the narrower, less used path. I hoped the creature would assume I took the wider trail. I ducked behind a big rock a few yards in, pressing myself flat against the cold stone, trying to calm my heavy breathing. For a moment, there was nothing but the pounding of my heart in my ears. Then I heard it, a low growl, followed by the crunch of footsteps on the path. It was too close. I held my breath, afraid that even the smallest sound would give me away. The footsteps stopped, and I could hear it sniffing the air. My stomach tightened. Could it smell me? I squeezed my eyes shut, every muscle ready to run at the first sign of danger. After a while, the footsteps started moving away. I counted seconds in my head, 10, 20, 30, until I was sure it was far enough. Then I slowly crept out from behind the rock and began moving down the trail as quietly as I could. I didn't run this time, couldn't risk noise. Instead, I moved fast but carefully, trying to keep my steps light. Every leaf rustle and twig snap made me jump. My eyes darted everywhere, looking for any sign of movement. The trail seemed endless, stretching far with no end in sight. When I finally spotted the parking lot through the trees, relief washed over me. My car was the only one left, sitting under a faint streetlight. I ran the last bit, fumbling with my keys as I reached the driver's door. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and started the engine, my hands shaking. I didn't look back as I drove away. I didn't want to see if it was still there, watching. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced over what had just happened. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the adrenaline faded, leaving me shaking and exhausted. I spent the rest of the night replaying it in my head, trying to understand what I had seen. Was it some kind of animal, person, something else entirely? I don't know. I haven't been back to that trail since, and I don't think I ever will. Whatever it was, I never want to see it again. It was supposed to be just another hike, a way to clear my head after a long week. Underneath my boots and the fresh smell of pine needles floating in the breeze, I felt calm. This outing was supposed to be another quiet day on the trail, a chance to get away from the noise of everyday life. I picked a path I had found online, a medium-level hike weaving through a wooded area that promised peaceful views and a decent challenge. The morning air was sharp, the kind of chill that nips your skin but doesn't force you indoors. I dressed in layers, starting with a thermal shirt and a soft fleece, knowing I'd take one off once the sun climbed higher. My backpack was packed with water, trail mix, a small first aid kit, a flashlight, and my reliable pocket knife just in case, a habit I'd formed after years of hiking. The trailhead was quiet when I arrived, only a couple of cars parked nearby. Their owners were already far ahead on the trail. I liked it that way. Fewer people meant more solitude. I tightened my backpack straps, checked my map again, and set off. The path started by winding gently through thick evergreens and ferns. The air smelled damp, a reminder of rain from earlier in the week. My boots crunched against the dirt and small stones. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the rhythm of my breathing and the sounds of the forest waking up around me. Birds flitted from branch to branch, their songs breaking the silence. Occasionally, I heard the faint rustle of something in the underbrush, maybe a squirrel or a rabbit. About an hour in, the trail began to slope upward. The climb was gentle at first, enough to make my thighs burn a little. I welcomed the challenge. That was part of what made a good hike. I adjusted my pack, took a sip of water, and kept moving. The trees started to thin as I climbed higher, and beams of sunlight filtered through the leaves. I caught glimpses of the valley below, a vast green spread reaching to the horizon. It was close to the 2-hour mark when I felt the first sign that something was wrong. At first, it was just a strange feeling, a vague sense of discomfort I couldn't explain. The forest grew quieter. The birds stopped singing, and even the breeze seemed softer, less lively. I stopped and pulled out my map to check where I was. Nothing seemed wrong. The trail was marked clearly, and I wasn't lost. I shrugged off the feeling, telling myself I was imagining things, and pressed on. But the deeper I went, the stronger the unease grew. The silence wasn't natural. I'd spent enough time outdoors to know that much. My senses sharpened. Every small sound felt louder in the stillness. A twig snapped behind me, and I froze, heart pounding. Slowly, I turned, scanning the trees. Nothing, just shadows and trunks. I told myself it was probably a deer. They could be easily startled by humans. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. I started walking again, this time a bit faster. My hand brushed instinctively against the handle of the knife clipped to my belt. The trail steepened now, forcing me to watch my step. Loose stones slid beneath my boots, and my breathing grew heavier. Then I saw it. At first, just a quick movement out of the corner of my eye. I stopped completely, heart racing in my ears. About 30 feet ahead, partially hidden by bushes, stood a mountain lion. Its tawny fur blended almost perfectly with the forest, making it nearly invisible except for its sharp yellow eyes locked onto mine. I'd read about what to do in this situation. Stay calm, don't run, make yourself appear bigger. But knowing that and doing it are very different things when fear grips you and your instincts scream to flee. I forced myself to breathe slowly, willing my hands to stop shaking. I raised my arms above my head. The mountain lion didn't move, just stared, its body tense in a way that made my skin crawl. I felt the weight of its gaze, cold, predatory, and intense. I took a careful step back, not turning my back on it. My mind raced, replaying every piece of advice I'd ever heard about mountain lions. Make noise, don't crouch, don't act like prey. I cleared my throat and shouted, "Go away!" My voice sounded weak even to me, but it was all I could manage. I grabbed a stick from the ground and waved it above my head, trying to look bigger. The mountain lion's ears twitched, but it didn't back off. Instead, it took a slow, deliberate step closer, muscles rippling under its fur. Panic surged through me, but I fought to keep calm. I knew running would trigger its chase instinct, and I couldn't outrun a predator like that. I kept backing up, eyes never leaving the animal. The path behind me was narrow, bordered by a steep drop on one side and a rocky slope on the other. My options were limited. The mountain lion moved forward again, its motions smooth and quiet. It was testing me, trying to decide if I was a threat or easy prey. My heart pounded harder as I realized I couldn't keep retreating forever. I needed a plan, something to shift the balance in my favor. My eyes darted around looking for something to use. A large rock lay just a few feet to my left. I bent down slowly, never breaking eye contact, and grabbed it. "Go away!" I shouted again, throwing the rock as hard as I could. It flew past the mountain lion and crashed into the bushes. The noise startled it, and it paused, ears swiveling. I grabbed another rock and threw it closer this time. It hit the ground near the cat's paws, kicking up dirt and pebbles. The mountain lion snarled, showing its teeth. My stomach dropped, but then, as if deciding I wasn't worth the trouble, it turned and slipped back into the trees. I stood frozen, breathing hard until I was sure it had left. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to keep moving. I didn't want to stick around and risk another encounter. The rest of the hike was a blur. I kept looking over my shoulder, every leaf rustle making me jumpy. When I finally reached the trailhead, I nearly collapsed into my car, locking the doors and sitting there for a long time, letting the adrenaline fade. That day changed how I saw the wilderness. It wasn't just a peaceful escape anymore. It was a reminder of nature's wild, untamed power. I still hike, but I'm more careful now, more aware of the risks. That encounter taught me to respect the wild, prepare for the unexpected, and most of all, never let fear control my actions. The chilly mountain breeze bit into my cheeks as I made my way along the path, my boots crunching over loose stones and dirt. The sun was slowly setting below the ridge, throwing long shadows across the uneven land. The woods around me were alive with soft sounds, the gentle rustling of leaves, a distant hoot of an owl, and the quiet murmur of the wind slipping through the branches. It was peaceful in a way only the wild can offer, but the deepening twilight added a sharp edge to that calm. My hand instinctively brushed the handle of the small but sturdy knife at my waist, a blade I always carried on hikes more out of routine than any real expectation of needing it. I was about 3 hours into my walk, heading back toward the parking area after a full day exploring the hills. The trail had been tough, with steep climbs and rocky paths, but the amazing views made every difficult step worth it. Now, though, I was worn out. My legs ached, my shoulders were sore from my heavy pack, and my stomach grumbled in protest of the granola bars and trail mix I'd been eating all day. I was eager to reach my car, where a bottle of water and a package of jerky awaited me. As I rounded a curve, the trees opened up to a clearing. The fading light bathed everything in a warm, golden glow. For a moment, I stopped to take it all in. In the distance, the mountain peaks stood tall, still capped with patches of snow even though the season was late summer. Below them, the forest stretched out like a vast green ocean, broken here and there by rocky ledges. It was stunning, harsh and wild, untouched by the noise of civilization beyond. But something felt off. At first, I couldn't quite place it. It was just a vague discomfort, a prickling at the back of my neck. I scanned the clearing, my eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. Nothing seemed wrong, but the feeling stayed. The forest sounds had quieted. I realized the birds were silent, and the usual rustling in the bushes had stopped. The only noise was a faint whistle of the wind, and even that seemed hushed, as if the world was holding its breath. Then I saw it. At the far edge of the clearing, half hidden behind a cluster of bushes, a pair of eyes glimmered in the dim light. They were wide, unblinking, and locked right on me. My breath caught as a mountain lion stepped out of the shadows. Its tawny coat blended almost perfectly with the surroundings, but there was no mistaking the powerful, muscular body and the smooth, predatory movements. It crouched low, body coiled like a spring, ready to leap. I froze. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but I knew better. Turning my back on a predator meant death. Instead, I planted myself firmly, making myself appear as large as I could. I raised my arms and shouted, my voice carrying across the clearing. "Go away!" The words felt weak beneath the heavy stare of the big cat. It didn't move. Its tail flicked slowly, deliberately, and its ears pressed flat against its head. My heart pounded fiercely, as if it might burst. Slowly, I reached down and grabbed the knife from my belt, holding it out in front of me. The blade caught the last slanting rays of sunlight, gleaming like a warning. Time seemed to slow, each second dragging on during the standoff. The lion's gaze stayed fixed on me, fierce and unyielding. Then, without warning, it sprang forward. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. One moment the lion was about 20 feet away. The next it was airborne, a blur of fur and claws hurtling toward me. I stumbled backward, throwing up my arms in a desperate attempt to shield myself. The impact never came. Instead, the lion landed just short, swiping with a huge paw. Its claws shredded my jacket and scraped my skin beneath. The pain was sharp and sudden, but adrenaline took over. I swung the knife wildly and instinctively. The blade found its mark, slicing into the lion's shoulder. It let out a furious roar, a sound that shook me deep inside, and took a few steps back. Blood darkened its fur, but the wound seemed to only enrage it. The lion circled me low, watching closely for an opening. Panic clawed at my mind, threatening to overwhelm me. I couldn't outrun this beast. Fighting was my only choice, but I was outmatched in every way. Feinted left, then darted right, testing me. I gripped the knife tighter, my palms slick with sweat, waiting for the next attack. When it came, I was ready. The lion lunged again, jaws snapping just inches from my face. I ducked low and drove the knife upward with all my strength. The blade sank deep into the lion's eye. The force jolted my arm hard. The lion screamed, a harsh, guttural cry that echoed through the trees. It thrashed wildly, knocking me down as it tried to shake the knife loose. I scrambled backward, scraping my hands and knees against the rough ground. The lion staggered, blood pouring from its ruined eye. It shook its head violently, the knife still stuck, and let out another roar. Then, to my surprise, it turned and fled, crashing through the brush and disappearing into the forest. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the spot where it had vanished. My chest heaved, breaths coming in ragged gasps. The adrenaline that had kept me standing faded, leaving me trembling and weak. My hands were slick with blood, some mine, most the lion's. My knife was gone, buried in the creature that had nearly killed me. Slowly, I stood up, my legs shaking like jelly, barely able to hold my weight. The clearing was silent again, the forest holding its breath once more. I looked down at my torn jacket and the shallow cuts beneath. They stung but were nothing compared to what could have happened. Somehow I was alive. Against all odds, I had made it through. The rest of the walk back to the parking area passed in a blur. Every shadow, Every rustle of leaves made my nerves jump. I kept expecting the lion to come back and finish what it had started, but the woods stayed quiet. When I finally reached my car, the sight of it felt like salvation. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat still for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. As I drove away, the night's events replayed in my mind, sharp and vivid. I had come face to face with one of nature's fiercest hunters and lived to tell the story. It was a sobering reminder of how fragile we are, how small we become in the wild. But it was also proof of the will to survive, the instincts that take over when there's no other choice. The mountains would always call to me, I knew. But next time I answered, I'd be better prepared. The wilderness was beautiful, yes, but it was also harsh, and it demanded respect. As I drove down the dark, winding road, that lesson settled over me, heavy but clear. I had faced the wild and survived, and I would never take that for granted again. I have always loved hiking. There's something about being out in nature, away. Mendocino County, California, is known as one of the most fertile farming regions in the country. It produces large amounts of hops, grapes, prunes, apples, dairy, and poultry every year. This is because of the wide stretches of rich soil and plenty of good irrigation water. Alongside the many vineyards and wineries, Mendocino might look like a perfect little paradise. But in the early 1970s, a string of terrifying events in the hills around Mendocino's biggest town, Ukiah, turned this peaceful place into something much darker. On January 15, 1973, two middle school friends were coming back from a trip to the Redwood Ice Rink. Patricia Helen Jacobs and Marilyn Joan Perry, both 13 years old, were last seen around 8:30 p.m. hitchhiking on Pine Ridge Road northeast of Ukiah. Neither girl returned home that night. Their families pleaded with local police to find them. Eventually, the searchers did find them. Their bodies were discovered on November 3rd, a few miles north of Willow Creek Road. At the scene, police found a single earring, some orange beads, and a 14-karat gold chain with a cross pendant. Because only skeletal remains were left, the exact cause of death couldn't be determined. About a month later, 20-year-old art student Nancy Diane Rogers got a ride from two men on the evening of February 8, 1973. She was last seen around 6 p.m. hitchhiking to class, carrying a large wooden barrel with red Asian symbols painted on it. Her body was found the next day in a creek bed down a steep embankment. The two men who had given her a ride passed lie detector tests and were cleared by police. This kind of hitchhiker murder kept happening again and again in the following years, but only a few cases matched the same pattern exactly. One case had a particularly chilling detail that could help identify the killer or killers. Emily Claire Matthews, age 15, ran away from her home near Redding in Shasta County on March 9, 1974. She disappeared on August 1st after being dropped off by her grandmother at the Garberville post office. She was last seen hitchhiking near the highway in Garberville that afternoon. Her body was found on August 15th, just a few yards from where Jacobs and Perry had been found over a year earlier. This time, the cause of death was clear. The coroner ruled it was strychnine poisoning. About 10 to 14 days before Emily's body was found, a witchcraft symbol meaning carrier of spirits was discovered near the remains. Besides these, there were 8 more unsolved murders of young women linked to the same unknown killer, but no one was ever convicted for any of the crimes. Still, several popular theories have been suggested about who the murderer really was. Kenneth Morris and Angelo Russo, the so-called Hillside Stranglers from Los Angeles, were considered suspects at one point. The Hillside Strangler case began when 3 escorts were found strangled and dumped naked on hillsides northeast of LA between November and December 1978. Later, 5 more women, who were not escorts but middle-class girls, disappeared, drawing intense media attention and the nickname Hillside Stranglers. However, there wasn't enough proof to connect Morris or Russo to the Mendocino County murders, so the search continued elsewhere. Another suspect was Frederick Manning, a 42-year-old creative writing teacher at Mendocino Community College. In October 1977, Manning was involved in a deadly head-on car crash on Highway 101. While police cleared the accident scene, they found something very disturbing among his personal belongings. Manning had a large collection of drawings, but instead of landscapes or still life, these sketches showed sadistic scenes involving a young woman. The woman in the drawings was identified as Nancy Rogers, the second victim in the series. Despite this, no direct evidence linked Manning to the actual murders. Ted Stanton, a notorious serial killer recently featured in a true crime documentary, was also suspected. Stanton was arrested for similar crimes in Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Nevada. Because of the similarities in how the bodies were found, naked and violently treated, he was considered a possible suspect. Stanton had spent time in nearby Sonoma County, but a detective there cleared him in the late 1970s and again in 1985, thanks to credit card receipts showing Stanton was in northern Washington at the time some victims vanished. Another name investigators had to consider was the Zodiac Killer, famous for sending cryptic letters to newspapers in San Francisco during the late 1960s and early 1970s. One letter he sent on February 15, 1975, referenced 37 victims and included a strange symbol resembling the Chinese characters found on the wooden barrel Nancy Rogers had carried. The Zodiac had also written a letter in 1969 promising to change his methods to confuse police, mentioning he would stop announcing his killings and make them look like random robberies or accidents. This led detectives to focus on Arthur Lee Adams, who lived in a mobile home park in Ukiah during that time. Adams had been fired from his elementary school teaching job in 1969 after accusations of inappropriate conduct with children. He was arrested in 1975 for a similar charge unrelated to the murders and spent time in a state hospital until 1978. This matched the timeline for some of the murders. Author Robert Graysmith, in his book Zodiac Unmasked, said a local sheriff told him that tiny chipmunk hairs were found on all the Ukiah hitchhiker victims, and Adams had been known to collect and study chipmunks. It seemed more than a coincidence. Adams was the main suspect in the Zodiac case for over 30 years, until his DNA was compared to samples taken from stamps and envelopes of confirmed Zodiac letters. The results showed no match. Fingerprints and blood found at the scene of one Zodiac victim also did not match Adams, and handwriting analysis ruled him out as the Zodiac Killer. This would likely have cleared him if he had gone to trial for those crimes. So, after nearly 50 years, the question remains: who was killing hitchhikers in the hills around Ukiah? Thanks for listening, friends. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future stories. If you have a story to share, please submit it to our subreddit, Our True Tales, where you can get feedback and maybe have your story featured next. Join our Discord to chat with me and other listeners directly. If you want to support the channel, get early access to new stories for just $1 a month on Patreon. Also, check out our merchandise on Spreadshirt and listen to our podcast for long story compilations to save data and listen anywhere. Links are in the bio. Thanks so much, and remember, cucumbers are just pickles in training. In March of 2014, Rowan Pierce Blake, a reporter for a local news station in Boise, Idaho, was at the scene of a car crash. There, he and his cameraman began interviewing a young man who was involved in the accident. The young man had long hair, wore a green hoodie, and had a blue bandana tied around his head. He gave his name as Jay. Jay described in some detail the terrible events that had happened while he was hitchhiking. Jay told the news team how he had been traveling by hitchhiking across Oregon when a man named Jason Simmons Matthews picked him up. At first, their talk was calm and neutral, but soon Jay felt uneasy when he realized that Jason Matthews claimed he was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ and said he could do whatever he wanted. Understandably, Jay felt unsafe riding with a man clearly struggling with serious mental problems. On top of that, Matthews was a huge man, weighing around 320 pounds, so Jay knew he could be dangerous if a fight broke out. Things got worse when Matthews openly told Jay something disturbing. Matthews said he was a businessman who often traveled the world to conduct his work. He bragged about visiting countries where American money could buy things that were illegal in the United States, including underage girls. Jay was forced to listen as Matthews spoke about how he had taken advantage of a 15-year-old girl while staying in the Bahamas. Matthews proudly said the girl was reluctant at first, but in the end, he got what he wanted. While Matthews was boasting about these awful acts, he became distracted and looked away from the road. That was when the crash happened. Matthews' car hit another vehicle, which then slammed into the path of a pedestrian. The pedestrian was violently crushed against a large truck. The news team later learned that Matthews had purposely targeted the pedestrian because the person was black. Shouts of pain echoed through the air. Rowan immediately jumped out of the wrecked car, intending to help the trapped pedestrian. Other bystanders also ran to the crash site to assist in saving lives. But when a smaller woman tried to call 911 on her cell phone, Matthews suddenly burst out from the driver's side. He grabbed the woman in a bear hug and began choking her. Rowan later said he could hear the woman struggling to breathe, weakly fighting Matthews, who was clearly trying to kill her. Rowan thought Matthews could have easily broken her neck. Knowing he had to act fast, Rowan took his backpack off and pulled out a small axe he kept for protection. Holding the handle tightly, he swung the blade repeatedly into the back of Matthews' head. He kept hitting him again and again, striking the back of Matthews' skull until the man finally loosened his grip on the woman. Matthews started to stagger away, blood streaming from the wound in his head. But shockingly, despite losing so much blood, Matthews, the giant man, still managed to walk away from the crash. It was clear Matthews was in some kind of severe mental breakdown. Police found him moments later at a nearby school, where he was behaving erratically. Matthews was then arrested by the local police. Around the same time, video footage of Jay explaining the attack went viral online. Jay was also taken into police custody but was released after a short questioning and hailed by many as a hero. Hundreds of thousands of people admired him as they watched him frantically describe how he had saved the nearly strangled woman. He said simply, "Smash," over and over, describing how he hit Matthews with his axe. Jay's sudden fame led to a brief interview on a popular late-night talk show hosted by Jimmy Kelly, who jokingly told his viewers, "You should never pick up hitchhikers, except maybe this one." But beneath the otherwise funny and popular video, a few details later raised questions about who Jay really was. When asked what his last name was, Jay said, "I don't have one." Asked where he was from, he claimed Boise, Idaho. When asked his age, Jay refused to answer. Why would someone be so reluctant to share such simple facts, yet be so willing to say where he was from? It turned out Jay was not from Boise at all. That was a lie. He was actually from Canada. Even more inconsistencies in Jay's story came to light. In July of 2014, thousands of miles from Idaho, a lawyer in New Jersey was brutally beaten to death with a heavy object in his home. Police released information about a suspect linked to the case. To many who had seen the viral crash video, the suspect's face was shocking. It was Jay, the hitchhiker hero. Jay was caught at a coffee shop in Philadelphia after a barista recognized him from wanted posters. It soon became clear that Jay had been living in the U.S. illegally and was detained by immigration authorities. Jay claimed to police that he had acted in self-defense when fighting the New Jersey lawyer named Joseph Goff. Jay said Goff had tried to assault him after offering him a place to stay for the night. Jay said the police believed the encounter was consensual and that the killing was planned. Jay insisted that after becoming famous from the Idaho crash video, he had no need to be around men like Goff, who he called unattractive. Jay even bragged, saying, "Do you know how many women, even if I were gay, wanted me after that? No offense, but Goff was no looker." After the murder charges were announced, views of the crash video surged. Fans who had seen Jay as a hero started raising money to help pay for his legal fees. But when the case went to trial, evidence clearly showed Jay had committed murder, not acted in self-defense. Jay took the stand but was angry and uncooperative during questioning. He even yelled out during his lawyer's closing statement, almost getting kicked out of the courtroom. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 55 years in prison and must serve at least 85% of that time before parole. The judge told Jay, whose real name was Caleb Lawrence McGregor, that when he becomes eligible for release, He will still be younger than Goff was when he was killed. Goff was 72 years old at the time of the murder. Jay's story shows how a person can go from being a hero to a villain, all in the swing of an axe. Away from the constant buzz of the town that usually clutters my mind, last autumn I chose to finally explore a hiking route I had wanted to try for a long time. It wasn't one of those busy, popular paths. This one was off the main roads, hidden among the foothills of a distant mountain range. On outdoor forums, people described it as both stunning and tough, which was exactly the push I needed. The morning I left, the weather was just right. Cool, but not chilly, with a fresh, clean feeling in the air that got stronger the deeper I breathed it. I had my hiking boots tied snug, my small backpack packed with water, snacks, and necessities like a basic first aid kit and a little flashlight. I had also saved a map of the area on my phone, just in case. The first few miles of the path were amazing. The dirt trail wound through thick clusters of fir trees, their needles blanketing the earth and softening my steps. Sunlight filtered through the branches, making flickering spots of light that moved as the wind shook the trees. Birds sang somewhere overhead, their calls sharp and clear in the quiet. I paused often, sometimes to take photos, other times just to soak in the views. A couple of times I saw deer quietly eating in the bushes. Their ears twitched when they spotted me. Then they bounded off into the forest. I didn't see any other hikers, but that wasn't surprising. This path wasn't made for easy strolls. It demanded effort. After about 2 hours, I reached a ridge that gave me a wide view of the valley below. I settled on a big rock and pulled out a granola bar, enjoying the taste along with the scenery. I spotted a thin ribbon of a river weaving through the valley, sparkling in the sunlight. Far off, I noticed dark clouds gathering. The weather report hadn't mentioned rain, but mountain weather is always unpredictable. I decided to keep watching the sky and to hike a bit further. The trail got steeper beyond the ridge, with spots where I had to use my hands to climb over rocks. The trees thinned out, replaced by tough bushes and patches of bare soil. The air turned cooler and the wind grew stronger. I stopped to put on the lightweight jacket I had packed. About 3 miles past the ridge, the trail flattened again, and I came to a small open space surrounded by rocky formations. The quiet there was strange. The rocks blocked the wind, making everything feel still. I paused to catch my breath and took a sip of water. That's when I noticed something unusual. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from one of the rocks. But moving closer, I saw it was a backpack, half covered by leaves and dirt. It looked old and worn out, with the fabric torn in several spots. I looked around, suddenly uneasy. There was no sign of anyone nearby, no footprints, no noises besides the wind. I debated whether to touch it. My curiosity won, and I gently pushed it with my foot. Felt heavier than I expected. Crouching down, I saw why. The zipper was slightly open, revealing a water bottle, a crumpled map, and something that looked like a rolled-up sleeping pad. It didn't make sense. No one would leave gear like this, especially in such a remote place. I stood up and scanned the clearing again, my heart beating faster. The storm clouds had moved closer, darkening the sky, and the wind had a colder bite. I decided not to stay. Whatever had happened here wasn't my concern, and I wasn't prepared for it. I made a note to report the abandoned pack once I returned to town and started walking again, picking up my pace. The trail dipped into a narrow ravine where trees grew so close together it felt almost like dusk, even though it was mid-afternoon. The air was damp and the ground soft beneath my boots. My nerves tightened with every step. Then I saw it, a boot sticking out from under a bush just off the path. My stomach clenched, and I froze, my mind racing. It was a worn hiking boot, covered in mud. Attached to it was a leg. The rest of the body was hidden by the bushes, but there was no doubt what I was seeing. For a few moments, I couldn't move. Then, with shaky hands, I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I hadn't had any since leaving the ridge. I forced myself to step closer, then another. The body lay face down, clothes ripped and filthy. I couldn't tell how long it had been there, but the air carried a thick, sickly sweet smell of decay. My stomach turned. I wanted to run, but I knew I couldn't just leave. Someone had to know about this. I pulled up the map on my phone, trying to figure out where I was. If I hurried, I could reach the ridge before nightfall where I might get a signal. I turned and started back the way I came, walking as fast as I could without running. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me. The storm hit just as I reached the ridge. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking me through. The wind howled, pushing me sideways, and the temperature dropped sharply. I pulled my jacket tighter and kept moving, my boots slipping on the wet rocks. Then, finally, my phone buzzed with a weak signal. I stopped and dialed emergency services, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The operator's voice was calm but faint over the roar of the wind. I gave my location as best as I could and told her what I'd found. She told me to stay where I was and wait for help. The next few hours were the longest of my life. I crouched under a rock ledge, wet and cold, while the storm raged. When the rescue team finally showed up, their flashlights cutting through the dark, I felt such relief it almost made me cry. They found the body the next day. The missing hiker had been gone for weeks. According to the news, foul play was ruled out. It seemed he had fallen and injured himself, unable to get help. I still think about him sometimes, especially when I hike alone. His backpack, left behind in that clearing, was a silent call for help that never came. I haven't stopped hiking, but I'm much more careful now. I stick to well-known trails and always tell someone where I'm going. Nature is beautiful, but it doesn't forgive mistakes. Every time I step onto a trail, it reminds me how small and fragile we really are. The sun was just beginning to set when I decided to turn back. People love to say it's dangerous to keep a gas can in your trunk. Honestly, that's just ridiculous. If you get rear-ended by someone whose car is already on fire, the gas that's already in your tank is a much bigger risk than any spare fuel you're carrying. And second, the risks you're supposedly taking by keeping extra gas in the car don't even come close to the danger of not having it when you need it. Here's why I say that. Years ago, I used to spend most of my time driving across the country. I was a traveling salesman before I retired, sold vinyl windows and siding. It was hard work, and I missed a lot of family time since I was always on the move, but I made a good living, especially in the upper Midwest, places like Minnesota, where winters got brutally cold. One year, during a particularly nasty cold snap, I got stuck out on a highway after forgetting to refill my spare gas can before setting out. I was ticked off at myself, but more than anything, I was scared. The weather was getting worse, and it was too dangerous to walk around looking for a gas station. I had no choice but to try and flag someone down. The Midwest is different when it comes to people. They're usually a lot more willing to help than what you find on the coasts. I wasn't standing by the road for long before an old car pulled over. The driver leaned out with a smile and waved me in. He said his name was Ralden. Never heard that name before, haven't heard it since. And the car? It looked like it had been turned into a rolling apartment. There were cords and chargers hanging from the dashboard, food wrappers all over the floor, and even a speaker bolted to the roof. The whole thing looked like something out of a low-budget sci-fi flick. I got in and explained I just needed to get to a nearby gas station and back so I could refill and get moving again. Ralden had a rough, raspy voice and said sure, he could help. But almost as soon as we hit the road again, he started grilling me with questions about my job and background. When I told him I sold siding, he started going off about how guys like me scam people, how we rip off old folks with cheap materials that let the cold in during winter. That really got under my skin. I wasn't some crook. I worked hard and I cared about my customers. It might not have been the job I dreamed of as a kid, but I did it right. Ralden mumbled an apology after a while. Said he'd known too many people who turned out to be lowlifes. Said he didn't mean anything by it. Told me he was glad I seemed decent. We'd just gotten past that when I saw a gas station appear up ahead. He pulled in and parked near the building. I hopped out and grabbed a red plastic gas can. As I was walking back, something inside the car caught my attention. There was a little flame flickering inside. It looked like a lighter, maybe for a cigarette, But either way, it was insane to be using it that close to open fuel. I hurried to the door and cracked it open, ready to ask him what the hell he was doing. But before I could say a word, I saw exactly what he was up to. He was burning his own hair. I froze. "What the hell are you doing?" I finally asked, stunned. "Saves money on barbers," he answered without even looking up. I could hear the pain in his voice as the flame hit his scalp. Smoke curled around his head. He kept going, mumbling something about feathering the ends and needing heat to shape it. I was too shocked to argue. I just told him to knock it off while I was holding a gas can near the car, and eventually he did. But that wasn't the weirdest part of the ride back. As we got going again, Ralden started groaning about a toothache. I nodded, said I could relate. My youngest had dental surgery the year before, and it cost a fortune. I started telling him about it, hoping to change the subject. But in the middle of my story, he suddenly let out a growl and pulled over on the shoulder. For a second, I thought he was going to throw me out of the car. But then, without a word, he reached under his seat and pulled out the biggest hunting knife I've ever seen in my life. I thought I was done for. I sat still, ready to bolt if he came at me. But he didn't. He took that knife and stuck it in his mouth. I could hear the metal scraping against his teeth. He clamped down on the blade and twisted. Blood started seeping from his lips and running down his chin. He was cutting into his own mouth. I just sat there, too horrified to speak. The sound of him grinding and grunting still haunts me. Eventually, I had to look away, but I kept listening. The moment I heard the crack of something breaking, I knew he'd done it. He'd yanked a tooth right out of his own head. He spit the bloody thing into his palm, rolled down the window, and flicked it out onto the highway. "Could have saved a few $100 on your girl like that, man," he muttered, his mouth still bleeding. I didn't say a word. Couldn't. A few miles later, we got back to my car. He pulled off and stopped like he said he would. I thanked him genuinely. He laughed, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It was low, scratchy, and mean-sounding. Still, I don't think he ever meant to hurt me. He was just unwell, totally out of it. Sometimes I still wonder where Ralden is now. Maybe he's still living out of that car, maybe still doing home surgery on himself. If he happens to read this, thanks, man. But please, for your own sake, find someone to talk to. You really need it. Hey everyone. My name's Caleb Morgan and I live just outside of Dundee. Years ago, I hitchhiked all the way across the US, from Charleston, South Carolina to Santa Barbara, California. This was in the late 90s, shortly after I'd finished university, and way before I'd picked any real direction in life. Turned out to be one of the most rewarding and eye-opening experiences I've ever had. I met people I still keep in touch with today. But along the way, something happened that still gives me chills. And while it didn't stop me from thumbing rides now and then, it definitely made me a lot more cautious about whose vehicle I stepped into on quiet roads. Like I said, I kicked off the trip on the South Carolina coast, then made my way across Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I had a great time in Texas. Austin especially surprised me with how laid back and artsy it was. Not what I expected at all from that state. Eventually, I found myself in southern Arizona, which is where this story unfolds. I'd hitched a ride with a cheerful lorry driver who was heading down the I-10 from Tucson to the Phoenix area. But since I was planning to catch the I-8 west into California, we parted ways near a little place called Suncrest. Despite the name, Suncrest isn't really a city. More like a dusty town with under 12,000 people and a main strip that barely had 6 storefronts. No offense to the folks living there, it just wasn't the bustling place I had pictured. So I decided to keep moving. The quicker I made it to the beaches of Southern California, the quicker I could relax in the sun. But that ended up being a major mistake. The sky was starting to dim as I approached the I-8 entrance, ready to flag down my next lift. As is typical with hitchhiking, plenty of cars whizzed by without slowing, not even a glance in my direction. But eventually, one vehicle did come to a slow roll just past where I stood. Quick side note, I've ridden in some absolutely disgusting cars before. Sometimes you hop into a truck and it smells like trash, or the seats got mystery stains. Comes with the territory. But this car, this one was spotless. As I walked around the back, I could see it was either fresh off the lot or meticulously cleaned. Either way, it felt like a lucky break. After sitting in so many grime-covered interiors, a tidy ride felt like luxury. Need a lift? The driver called out as I got to the window. Two men, dressed too sharp for your average cross-country drivers, sat up front. Not the usual kind of people who pull over for someone with their thumb out, but I wasn't about to question it. I said sure, pulled open the back door, and climbed in. Right off the bat, the driver commented on my accent and asked where I was from. I told him I was from Scotland, taking a gap year to explore the southern states. Then he asked if I'd ever been to Mexico. I told him no, but I'd always wanted to go. Maybe once I found work in California, I could head down for a visit. It's beautiful, he replied. That's where my family's from. Gorgeous place, but wild, he added with a grin. The man in the passenger seat laughed along with him, in a way that didn't sit quite right with me. Soon after, they switched to speaking Spanish. I'm sure they assumed I couldn't understand any of it, but I had taken a few years of Spanish in school. My vocabulary wasn't perfect, but I picked up on bits and pieces. It was when I heard the phrase "podemos usarlo" that my stomach turned. Translated loosely, it means, we can use it. In this case, it was me. I couldn't tell whether they were talking about stealing from me or something worse, but another phrase followed soon after that cleared it up. Mula ciega, blind mule. I'd watched enough documentaries and travel horror stories to know what that usually meant. They likely planned to sneak drugs onto me, take me into Mexico, then bring me back across the border so they could retrieve their stash. Then I caught something else. Asterisk, si lucha, lo disparamos. Asterisk, if he fights, we shoot him. That's when the driver suddenly said something aloud. Funny you mention Mexico. We're heading across the border to visit family. You should come with us. That sealed it. They weren't joking around. I quickly said no thanks, that I just needed a lift west, as far into California as they could take me. But they didn't let it go. They started insisting. Their tone was different now. No more smiles, just pressure. That's when I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to get out of there unharmed. I started holding my stomach and groaning, faking like I was sick. After a few moments of this, one of them asked if I was okay. Had some dodgy burritos back in Suncrest. I lied. Not sitting right. They murmured something in Spanish again, and the tension in the car seemed to rise. Can you guys pull over? I said, sounding panicked. I think I'm about to throw up. Don't you puke in my car, the driver snapped. Gone was the friendly voice. I kept up the act, fake gagging and dry heaving so hard he finally slammed the brakes and pulled off onto the shoulder. The second the car stopped, I jumped out, dashed off the road, and tumbled down a nearby slope, making the loudest, most awful retching sounds I could manage. It worked. I actually gagged hard enough to throw up some stomach fluid. Not my finest hour, but I wasn't taking any chances. To sell it even more, I wiped some of it on my shirt and face. Gross, I know, but I had to make it convincing. Then I shuffled back up the slope slowly, legs clenched together, looking miserable. When they looked down at me in disgust, I pointed toward my backside, as if to say something had slipped out during the chaos. Ugh, that's sick, one of them muttered before turning back toward the car. They didn't say another word to me, just jumped in, slammed the doors, and sped off down the highway. I can count on one hand the number of times I felt more relieved in my life. I actually did a little dance right there in the dark, just happy to be alive and free. And the lesson here? Be extremely careful about whose car you climb into, especially on a quiet stretch of road. Sometimes it's smarter to deal with a sketchy motel for the night than to risk everything with strangers, especially ones who might be connected to something far more dangerous than they let on. I've spent my entire life in a secluded Appalachian town nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills and steep inclines. It's a place where everyone knows each other, or at least has heard stories about one another. My family has been rooted here for generations, our name intertwined with the ridges, streams, and old cabins scattered across the landscape. As a child, I was always drawn to the outdoors. Fishing, hunting, and hiking were my favorite pastimes. From the moment I could walk, my grandfather would take me along the foothills, teaching me to spot signs of wildlife. Tracks in the mud, tufts of fur on broken branches. When I was old enough to venture out alone, I often wandered deeper into the woods, never giving much thought to the local legends whispered around campfires. I recall tales of strange silhouettes seen at dusk, eerie lights flickering atop ridges only to vanish without explanation. Some claimed to hear chanting in the distance. Others found footprints that didn't match any known animal. I listened with amusement, attributing these stories to overactive imaginations. After all, these mountains are teeming with wildlife, and if you're already on edge, a rustle in the leaves or a deer darting away can easily be mistaken for something more sinister. I never believed those stories until one autumn when I encountered something that challenged my skepticism. It was a Saturday, the air crisp with the onset of fall. The leaves had turned shades of russet and gold. I decided to hike up a ridge we called High Pine Peak. Not an official name, but one my childhood friends and I used because of the two massive pine trees near the summit that stood out among the oaks and maples. I aimed to capture photographs of the autumn foliage and perhaps catch the sunset if I timed it right. Setting out around noon with my usual gear, I planned a route along the eastern side of the ridge, following an old, overgrown logging trail that wound through hollows and gullies. This trail eventually connected to a steeper path near the top, leading around the boulder-strewn summit. Having hiked it many times before, I was confident in my plan. The first couple of hours were peaceful. The trees were stunning, some already shedding leaves that created a crackling carpet of reds, oranges, and yellows. Occasionally, a squirrel would dart across the trail, sending leaves flying. Wikipedia 1. Eventually, I reached a section where the trees grew denser and the canopy blocked more light. The air grew cooler and a light mist drifted between the trunks, a typical occurrence in the Appalachian high ridges during fall. Despite growing up here, the sudden hush and creeping fog always felt eerie. My footsteps seemed too loud, and every snap of a twig made me flinch. I paused to drink some coffee from my thermos, using a mossy rock as a makeshift seat. I couldn't help but think about those stories I'd heard, reminding myself not to mistake shadows for mysterious beasts or wind for ghostly whispers. Satisfied with my break, I stood up and continued on, planning to reach the steeper trail within the hour. That's when I noticed something unusual in the distance to my left, a flicker of movement between the thicker trunks. At first, I assumed it was a black bear. I even caught a glimpse of a dark limb, but as I tried to focus, the movement stopped and the figure disappeared. I shrugged it off, thinking I might have seen a bear, and made a mental note to keep a safe distance. About half a mile further, the logging trail curved around a slope. The brush on either side was overgrown, but the path itself was mostly clear. I slowed down when I saw something lying about 30 feet ahead. It looked like a fallen branch or a log. As I approached, I realized it wasn't a branch but a cluster of broken limbs, snapped and arranged in a deliberate-looking way, almost like a crude barrier. There were no cutting or sawing marks. It looked like they'd been twisted or broken by force. Perhaps strong winds had come through recently, but it seemed constructed rather than accidental. Looking up, none of the nearby branches were broken. These had been collected and placed here. Sometimes local kids would set up things like this for pranks, but we were far from any frequently traveled route, and kids rarely ventured this deep into the woods alone. I stepped around the pile, tempted to dismantle it, but something inside told me to leave it alone. So I continued along the trail, unsettled but mostly intrigued. About 20 minutes later, I reached an open stretch of trail offering a view of the surrounding ridges. On clear days, you could see for miles, but that day, a pale haze clung to the valleys, making it hard to see more than a mile ahead. The sky was clouding over, and the temperature seemed to drop a few more degrees. I considered turning back. Then I spotted it, a figure standing near the crest of the slope, maybe 70 yards ahead. It stood upright but with an off posture, perhaps hunched. Whatever it was, it looked unusually tall and thin, wearing some kind of dark, ragged covering that might have been clothing or perhaps a wrap of fur or leaves. I couldn't be sure at this distance. My mind scrambled for explanations. A hiker with a large backpack, a hunter in camouflage, but the figure didn't move like a person. It took a step sideways, then another, in a way that reminded me of how a heron might move along a riverbank. As I watched, the figure shifted and glided out of view behind a cluster of mountain laurel. I say glided because that's truly what it looked like. No heavy footfalls, no bending of the knees like a typical walk. I stayed rooted to the spot for maybe 30 seconds. Was I seeing things? Did I just see that right? Maybe it was a trick of the fog and my imagination. The rational part of me insisted I follow it and get closer. For all I knew, it could be a lost hiker or a local hermit who didn't want to be disturbed. If I saw it up close, I could rest easy. I've always been pragmatic but also stubbornly curious. Against my better instincts, I shouldered my backpack, took a deep breath, and made my way up the slope where I had last seen the figure. But I didn't find any footprints, just damp leaves. The leaves, though, looked like they'd been disturbed in a path heading westward. I followed the trail of scuffed foliage, watching carefully for any more movement. After about 5 minutes, I came to a large rocky outcrop where the mountain laurel grew thick, forming almost a natural wall. I wondered how the figure could have possibly slipped through without me hearing branches crack or at least seeing them sway. The laurel was dense, and moving through it would have made a tremendous amount of noise, yet I heard nothing. I pressed around the outcrop and found a narrow gap, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. My jacket snagged on a branch, making a loud tearing sound. The gap led to a small clearing, a hidden hollow with a flat, moss-covered rock at the center and a ring of stunted oak trees around its perimeter. The air in that hollow was dead still. I heard no wind or bird calls. The ground felt oddly spongy beneath my boots. Cautiously, I advanced, looking left and right, but there was no sign of anyone or anything else. Before long, though, I saw it, crouched at the far edge of the clearing near the trunk of an oak. It was definitely tall, well over 6 feet, maybe closer to 7, with thin limbs and proportions that didn't seem quite human. The covering it wore, or perhaps grew from its body, hung in dark tatters. As I stood there, it slowly turned its head toward me. I couldn't see a face exactly, more like an elongated shape with ridges where a skull should have been. Yet I had the unmistakable impression that it was watching me with intense scrutiny. My blood pounded in my ears. I felt an overwhelming, instinctual urge to run, but my name is Karen Delane, and I used to be what you'd call a flower child. Well, honestly, I probably still am in some ways. Back in the day, though, I was really deep into that lifestyle. At 19, I packed a small bag, climbed aboard a brightly painted van, and rode it all the way to Nepal. The next few years were a blur of hitchhiking, across Europe, through parts of northern Africa and the Middle East. Back when things weren't quite as dangerous as they are now, believe it or not. So naturally, I've always had a soft spot for folks thumbing rides on the roadside, and I've always felt a kinship with those kind enough to give them a lift. I hardly ever passed up the chance to stop for someone with their thumb out. That kind of mindset led to one decision I'll never forget. A ride I offered on a stretch of road outside of Worcester, Vermont one late evening. I was headed home after spending the day in Montpelier, driving along the highway toward the small town of East Brookfield, where I lived at the time. That's when I saw him, tall, thin, dressed in a long charcoal-colored coat, standing on the shoulder with his thumb raised. I slowed down, leaned over, and greeted him through the open passenger window, asking where he was headed. He said he was on his way to New Hampshire, but that he'd be grateful for any distance I could help him with, even just partway. I told him I could get him as far as my town. As he climbed in, I noticed he had a bag with him, one of those old-fashioned bowling-style duffel bags, rounded on top with skinny handles. There wasn't anything odd about the bag itself, but he was holding on to it a little too tightly, and that caught my eye. But that subtle detail quickly faded from my mind when another, much more noticeable issue hit me. The stench. He smelled awful. It was a strong, sour rot, something truly foul. I was instantly thankful that I was only driving as far as East Brookfield. I've never been one to judge someone for not smelling fresh. I've been around plenty of rough travelers in my younger years. He must have noticed my expression or maybe the way I wrinkled my nose because he apologized for the odor. Said he'd been traveling for several days and hadn't been able to afford a place to clean up or rest. I told him not to worry, that I'd been in similar situations myself, and that a bit of fresh air would help. I rolled the window down, hoping it would ease the smell, but even with the breeze coming through, it hung in the air. Eventually, I gave up and just breathed through my mouth for the rest of the ride. As we drove, I started getting a little worried about his health. Some types of infections, like untreated wounds, can give off a horrific odor. If he'd been using drugs or something like that, it might have caused serious damage. I tried to gently ask how he was feeling. He just smiled and said he felt fine. Maybe a little underweight, but otherwise healthy. I was pretty sure I'd seen him limping a little when he first got in, but I didn't want to push. Making your passenger feel uncomfortable doesn't make for a safe or peaceful ride. We got to my town, and as politely as I could, I dropped him off at a gas station on the edge of East Brookfield. I didn't let it show, but I was relieved, more than I'd like to admit. Still, the smell lingered in my car like something stuck in the upholstery. I sprayed every air freshener I had, but it didn't make a dent. That night, I scrubbed the entire passenger seat with a mix of dish soap, vinegar, and hot water. It was the first time I'd ever regretted giving a ride to someone like that. I felt terrible, like I'd somehow turned cold and heartless, all because someone smelled bad. But that guilt melted away the next morning. I was telling my girlfriend over breakfast about picking up the hitchhiker, not thinking much of it. The moment I mentioned it, though, her face changed. She gave me a look I'd only seen maybe once before. Pure fear. I kept asking her what was wrong, what she knew that I didn't. She didn't answer. She just flipped open the paper she'd been reading and pointed to a tiny article near the bottom of one page. It was a short piece, just a couple of paragraphs, about a man who'd escaped from a correctional facility in upstate New York. A tall, thin inmate. The article mentioned that he had been mistakenly approved for release and had disappeared shortly after. Authorities believed he was heading toward Canada. They also mentioned something else, that he walked with a noticeable limp. I sat there frozen, the same chill running down my spine as I remembered watching that man limp his way to my passenger door. My girlfriend called the police immediately while I phoned my job to let them know I'd be late. 2 officers showed up within half an hour and sat down with me to go over every detail I could recall. What did he look like? What was he wearing? What kind of bag did he have? Where had I dropped him off? Where had he said he was going? I gave them all the answers I could. But then I brought something up myself, the smell. I described how terrible it had been. I told them it stuck in my car for hours afterward. I asked if he might have been sick. Maybe he had something contagious. I'd sat in close quarters with him for nearly an hour. That scared me more than anything. One of the officers gave me this hard look. One I'll never forget. He said the man likely wasn't ill, at least not in the way I was thinking. Then he asked me if I really wanted to know what could have caused that smell. I said yes, of course I wanted to know. He told me that before the escapee crossed into Vermont, they believed he'd stopped in Buffalo, New York. The police were investigating a crime scene there, a brutal one. They said it was possible, likely even, that the man had taken a keepsake from that place. Something horrific, possibly a severed human head. That was the last time I ever picked up someone I didn't know, and I meant it. For the rest of my life, I will never, ever get into a car with a stranger who doesn't have an official rideshare sticker on the passenger door. The moment I decided to try hitchhiking, I already knew it was a terrible choice. I told myself not to do it, but I didn't listen. And guess what? I was right. That's why I've been so hard on myself since then. I understood the dangers, and still I went through with it. So please, read what happened to me and remember, every time you think you can save some money by thumbing a ride instead of paying for a taxi, think again. Every night after finishing my job as a waitress, I needed to get a bus from downtown Cleveland all the way to Lakewood, where I live with my mom. Sometimes, depending on what time I finished, I had to catch the very last bus. Literally the final one on the route. It was either that, spend my earnings on a cab, which was almost impossible, or try to walk. And walking was not an option in Cleveland's cold winter. One night, I was on that very last bus, ready to go home to my warm bed after a tough shift. I had my headphones in, listening to a true crime podcast, when I suddenly heard a sharp sound behind me. It was muffled by the voices on the podcast, so I turned around and saw the seats behind me covered in shattered glass. Someone had thrown a rock through the bus window, making a hole as big as a soccer ball. Some people really don't have respect for others. Though that scared me a little, it was nothing compared to what happened next. A few blocks down the road, the bus stopped again. I saw the driver talking to a passenger who wanted to get on, but the passenger shook his head in frustration and walked away. I had a bad feeling. I pulled out one earbud and heard the driver say, "Sorry, I can't go any further. It's a safety problem." I was furious. As I walked to get off the bus, wondering how I'd get home, the driver tried to explain the situation to me. I stayed polite, knowing it wasn't his fault, but I was still mad. I pulled out my phone and tried to call a rideshare, but the driver kept canceling my requests. I don't know why. I have a nearly perfect rating. I kept trying again and again, but it was clear I wouldn't get a ride that night. Then the idea to hitchhike came to me. Standing at that cold bus stop, I knew I'd freeze if I just waited for another ride. I thought risking a $10 cab fare wasn't worth the cold, so I stuck my thumb out, hoping someone would stop for me. After a while, a man did. I felt a huge relief because he looked normal and polite. "Are you okay?" the man asked from the open car window. He wore glasses and a neat gray shirt and tie, looking like a harmless office worker. "Yes, but my ride is gone," I said, pointing sadly back toward the bus flashing its hazard lights. At first, he seemed friendly, asking how my day was and what I did for work. But then, he started acting strange, questioning why my shift ended so late. I told him some places work late, even 24 hours sometimes, but he didn't believe me. It felt odd, but I didn't want to be rude since he was helping me out. "Well, you don't look like you've ever worked as a waitress," he said, sounding skeptical. I tried to joke to ease the mood, but it didn't work. His attitude suddenly turned cold, and when he called me young lady, my skin crawled. I realized he didn't stop just to be kind. He was acting possessive, and I didn't like it. "Admit it," he said. "You're not a waitress, and you weren't on that bus." I told him I knew what he was trying to do and that I wasn't going to rob him. His voice got low and threatening. He started driving faster, weaving dangerously through traffic. I begged him to slow down, showing him my uniform as proof I wasn't lying, but he ignored me. The other cars honked, but nothing compared to the fear I felt. I was crying and shaking, muscles tight, expecting a crash any second. "Try me, Missy," he growled. "I'll kill us both before you take anything from me." I had never been so relieved to see flashing police lights behind us. The man pulled over and told the officer he was trying to avoid being robbed. When the cop asked who was trying to rob him, the man pointed at me, the crying waitress in the passenger seat. The cop looked horrified and told him to get out of the car. What should have been a 40-minute trip home turned into 3 hours of fear, confusion, and a police interview. The cops wanted to charge him with kidnapping, but since I said I got in the car willingly, they could only charge him with reckless driving. But the damage was done. Please learn from my mistake. Always take your ride shares. The night of December 28th, 2011 was probably one of the worst of my life. To put it simply, Christmas had been rough that year, and it had really taken a toll on me mentally. A full-on screaming match with my mother later that night was the final straw. I stormed out of our house, cursing and yelling that they'd never have to see me again. Yeah, I was that dramatic teenager. Of course, I'd left my phone and money behind, but I was way too stubborn to turn back for them. In my half-angry, half-self-righteous mood, I figured hitchhiking to a friend's place was a smart move. I'd never even tried hitchhiking before. I don't think I'd even stuck my hand out for a taxi. But there I was, standing on a quiet stretch of road in southern Georgia, trying to catch a ride. To my surprise, someone pulled over almost right away. It wasn't the beat-up van or old truck I had in my head either. It was a newer-looking Chevy SUV. I don't remember the model, but the guy driving looked like someone who had a decent job and a good paycheck. He was dressed well and looked more like someone's well-off uncle than a creep. He leaned over and told me to hop in. I honestly thought I'd lucked out. Not only was I about to hitchhike for the first time, but it was in a clean, air-conditioned car that still smelled like it was straight off the lot. At 18, that felt kind of exciting. He asked why I was out on the road like that, and I'll admit, I exaggerated the story a bit. Made it sound like I was a poor kid with a terrible home life. He seemed to buy it and started telling me about how his own dad was abusive and drank too much when he was a kid. He said he understood where I was coming from. I told him I just needed to get to a buddy's house about a half-hour drive from where we were. He said no problem, and we started down the highway. While we drove, we talked more about our families. At one point, he opened the glove compartment and showed me a photo of his kids. 2 little girls, maybe 5 and 7. He said family was everything to him, especially when you didn't grow up with a steady one. I was looking at the picture when he said something weird. We were pulling into a gas station when he muttered something like, asterisk. Sometimes we have to protect our families from who we really are. Asterisk. That line threw me off. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there thinking about it while he pumped gas. The longer I sat there, the more I started to question whether getting into this car had been a good idea. When he got back in and started driving again, there was a heavy silence. I was still hung up on that comment, so I just asked him what he meant by it. He said, asterisk. It's easier to show you than explain it. Asterisk. Have you ever thought about what it might be like to throw yourself out of a car going 60 miles an hour? I hadn't, not until that moment. I honestly considered it, but I ended up telling myself I was being paranoid. Too dramatic. So I stayed put. I didn't even ask him to stop. Looking back now, I don't know what the hell I was thinking. I just knew something in the car didn't feel right anymore. He'd gone from friendly and understanding to quiet and unsettling in what felt like seconds. Then he pulled into a small business lot off the road and killed the engine. Everything was dark, and I remember thinking this couldn't be good. He turned to me and said, asterisk. Everybody hides things. Asterisk. The way he said it gave me chills. Imagine the creepiest voice possible, then make it worse. That's what it sounded like. I tried to stay polite because I still needed him to get me where I was going. But I was losing my nerve. I was about to ask what he was talking about when he suddenly put his hand on my leg. Not just resting it there, either. He grabbed and squeezed. Let me be clear, this wasn't about orientation. One of my older cousins is gay, and nobody in our family ever treated him differently. This wasn't about being touched by a man. This was about who was doing it and how. The guy had talked about his wife, his kids. He even made a joke about his annoying in-laws earlier. This wasn't someone being honest about who they were. This was someone dangerous who saw a young, upset teenager and thought they could take advantage. The look in his eyes wasn't affection. It was hunger, like someone about to dig into a big meal. I hit him. I'm not a fighter. I've never trained for anything like that. I don't think I even punched him properly, but I hit him hard enough to make my message clear. Not tonight. Then I went for the seatbelt. Tried to unbuckle it, nothing happened. I hit the release button again and again. It didn't click, didn't move. It was jammed or rigged or something. And this man, he smiled. I will never forget the look on his face when he realized I was trapped. It was the look of someone who thought they'd already won. Pure predator. I started yelling. Not just yelling, screaming like a little kid in a nightmare. You know those dreams where you try to scream but nothing comes out right? That was me. I was terrified. I'm not even sure how it all played out after that. I remember slamming my fist against the passenger window and it breaking, glass going everywhere. Somehow I got the door open. There were headlights behind us. Someone was pulling up. I heard a voice yell. It snapped the guy out of whatever he was planning. He reached down under his seat, and I thought he was about to pull a weapon. But the seatbelt suddenly felt loose. I didn't stop to think about it. I tumbled out of the car onto the pavement as the guy hit the gas and sped off. Later, I figured maybe he had some kind of lock or setup that kept the belt stuck unless he released it from under his seat. Sounds crazy, but that's the only thing that makes sense. It had been tight, then all at once it wasn't. Police showed up not long after. The person who'd pulled in behind us must have called them. I was just sitting there, in shock. I couldn't even process what had almost happened. I didn't know what that man had planned, but I knew it wasn't innocent. I knew it wasn't good. And what messed me up the most was that I had chosen that car. I put myself in that spot. I let my pride, my anger, and my lies push me into a stranger's vehicle. I almost paid the ultimate price for it. Let me start by saying I was never someone who believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. But the events I'm about to talk about have been happening since around 2010. My wife's really into spooky stuff and watches all the shows, and she talked me into writing this out to see if anyone else might have gone through the same thing or can explain it. I'm Derek, and I'm from a quiet little town in northern Georgia. The first time I saw this woman, because I still don't know what else to call her, was during my last year of high school. I just call her her, because I don't have a name or any clue who she is. At first, she only appeared when I was asleep. It all started around March of 2010. Like most seniors, I was ready to move on and start the next chapter. My parents had split up when I was in 3rd grade, so I lived mostly with my mom but spent every other weekend at my dad's. By the time I hit senior year, my sister, who's about 7 years older than me, had already moved out. I decided to live with my dad for that last year because his house was closer to school and where I worked part-time. Dad had remarried, and his new wife had 2 kids from her previous marriage. A daughter in her early 20s and a son just about the same age as me, maybe a few weeks older. Me and my stepbrother had to share a room, but he wasn't around much. He stayed out a lot with his girlfriend or his buddies, so I had the place to myself most nights. One Friday night, he was out again, and I didn't get off work until around 10:30 p.m. I came home, showered, and dropped straight into bed. I remember clearly that I left the light on because I always did that when home alone. I passed out almost right away. Then the dream started, but it didn't feel like a normal dream. It felt clearer, almost too sharp. In it, I was walking through my high school gym, headed toward the locker rooms. I could hear someone crying, so I followed the sound. It led me to the shower area, where all the showers were running full blast, water echoing off the tiles. In the middle of the room was a girl. She had long dark hair hanging over her face and was crying, shoulders shaking. At first, I just wondered why a girl was in the boys' locker room, but I kept walking up to her. When I got close enough, I reached out and put my hand gently on her shoulder. The moment my fingers touched her, she shot upright. Her face turned to me. Her eyes were completely missing, just hollow, black holes. I jumped back in total fear and woke up gasping for breath. I sat up so fast that I nearly fell off the bed. My heart was racing, and I noticed something immediately. The room was pitch black. I knew I had left the light on before falling asleep, and that only made me panic more. I stood up, still feeling like I wasn't fully awake, and that's when I saw it. Across the room, in the corner, there was something standing there. A shape, a shadow. I couldn't see much detail, just that it was a figure with long hair. I rushed to the light switch, flipped it, nothing. The light didn't turn on. I even smacked my own face to make sure I was awake. The thing just stood there. It didn't move. I stayed up the entire night, staring at the corner, too scared to even blink. A few years later, I was living in an apartment with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. We had a big bed that we shared with our 2 dogs. Between the 2 of them, they took up most of the space, so I usually ended up near the edge of the mattress. One night, sometime after 4 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. I came back, laid down, and turned over to face the wall. Our bedroom door was just barely open. We always left it cracked so the dogs could move in and out. The room was mostly dark, but I opened my eyes a little just before drifting off again, and she was there, right next to the bed. The same long hair hanging in her face, but this time she was leaning over me, just inches from where I lay. I jolted upright in shock and accidentally knocked our small terrier clean off the bed. I felt terrible about that later. I turned on the lamp immediately, which woke up my wife and our other dog, a big Labrador. As soon as the light came on, she disappeared. My wife already believed in strange things, so when I told her what I saw, she was unsettled but not surprised. We stayed up for hours, neither of us able to relax after that. The last time I saw her was the worst, and it happened not too long ago, December of 2023. I work overnight shifts about 35 minutes from home. My wife also works night shifts, though she's in another department across the complex. Normally, we commute together, but that night she stayed home with the flu, so I had to drive alone in the dark. My route takes me down some old rural roads. About halfway through, there's a stretch we all call the Twin Bridges. Two narrow, concrete bridges that cross a wide creek. My wife hates that part of the road. She always shuts her eyes until we're across. I never really understood why until that night. I was maybe a mile out when I started to feel uneasy. I chalked it up to being thrown off by the change in routine. I crossed the first bridge with no issues. As I came up to the second, I saw something standing in the middle of the road. I thought maybe someone's car had broken down. But as I got closer, I didn't see any vehicle at all. That's when I realized it was her. She was standing dead center in the road, facing me. Her hair wasn't covering her face this time. Her mouth was open, huge, stretched unnaturally wide like she was screaming. But I couldn't hear anything. No sound at all. I panicked and hit the gas, flying past her. As I did, I heard this awful noise. Something between a mountain lion's screech and a woman's wail. It made my skin crawl. I haven't heard anything like it before or since. I didn't stop until I reached work. I parked, hands still shaking, and immediately called my wife. The whole night I couldn't focus, jumping at every tiny sound. The next morning, I dreaded the drive back, but at least it was light out. I crossed the bridges as fast as I could and made it home without seeing anything. She hasn't appeared since then, but the fear still lingers. The worst part is there's no clear pattern. The dream was one thing, but seeing her beside my bed, then standing in the road, and hearing that terrible noise, it's a whole different level of disturbing. I don't know who she is. I don't know what she wants from me. I just want it to stop. Has anyone out there experienced something even remotely close to this? Because I feel like I'm losing my mind. Please, I just want her gone. This happened around 6 or 7 years ago. I was about 13 or 14 at the time. I grew up in central Indiana, somewhere in between the rural farmlands of the north and the busier southern cities. It wasn't densely wooded, but it wasn't all pavement either. There were scattered neighborhoods, fields, small woods, and sleepy little towns. For some context, I lived in a mobile home park along a back road, about 2 miles outside the nearest small town. It was quiet out there, just on the edge of real country. Running along the roadside next to the trailer park were 2 ditches. One ditch only stretched about 40 or 50 yards before ending at an access road. That's where the second, much wider ditch began. That bigger ditch started off tight, but it opened up into a fair-sized pond behind the park. Close to that ditch, near the back edge of the mobile home park, was a narrow wooded area. But it wasn't really a full forest, just a 200-yard path lined with trees, like a leafy tunnel that connected the edge of the park to the main road. My older cousin lived with our grandfather there when he was little, and he always had creepy stories about that trail. He used to say there were strange noises and weird things buried in the ground. One time, he even claimed to have found a human skull buried in the dirt, though I never really believed him. I always figured he said that just to freak me out. He also used to talk about a dark shape that lived in those trees. He said the woods were built on old tribal grounds and might be cursed. Now that you know what the place looked like, here's what actually happened. It was a mild fall afternoon, cloudy and breezy. My best friend Kyle and I spent most of our time outside back then. We liked to play make-believe war games using tree branches as pretend weapons. We didn't have toy guns, so we used whatever sticks we could find. The trailer park was full of abandoned trailers, places no one lived in anymore but hadn't been taken away yet. It made for an awesome place to run around and explore. If you ever played with stick guns, you know how rare it is to find a really good one. Once you find that perfect one, you try your best not to lose or break it. That day, I found one I liked. It looked just right for a pretend rifle. but Kyle was struggling to find a decent stick that was big enough to be a machine gun. After searching around the park without any luck, he said we should try the woods. Normally, we didn't go in there. That strip of trees gave us a weird feeling, and most of the branches there were either too bent or too thick to use. But for some reason, that afternoon we decided to check it out anyway. As soon as we stepped onto the trail, the air felt heavy, like we had crossed a line we weren't supposed to. The breeze picked up, and since most of the leaves had already fallen by then, the tall poplar trees whistled and groaned overhead. It made the whole place feel even more off. We were about halfway down the path, looking for branches on the ground. I was being pretty picky. I didn't want to touch anything that looked like it might have bugs on it, and honestly, I just wanted to leave. I felt uneasy the whole time, and I didn't know why. Kyle, on the other hand, was digging through every pile of twigs and fallen limbs, determined to find his perfect stick. There's a small thing I should mention here. Right around the middle of the path, off to the right side, there was a weird little section we always called the island. It wasn't an actual island, but it felt separate. Dense shrubs and sharp-branched bushes made it hard to get to, so we usually stayed away from it. While Kyle was busy rummaging through a big pile of broken sticks near that area, we both noticed something strange. The birds stopped singing. All the usual forest sounds, bugs, rustling, chirping, just went completely still. That silence hit all at once, and then we both saw the tree limbs up ahead start to shake. It wasn't wind. It looked like someone was pulling on them, shoving them around. Then we heard the sound. Leaves crunching underfoot, about 20 feet to our right. I turned to look, and I saw it, clear as day. There was a dark figure, hunched over, standing there between the trees. It wasn't see-through or shadowy. It was solid black. It had a rounded, slumped back, and its arms stuck out in front, with its hands dangling down like paws. It moved in this weird, fast but soft motion, running on its toes, crashing through brush and branches like they weren't even there. It didn't look confused or lost. It looked like it had a mission, like it wanted us out. The second I saw it, I smacked Kyle on the shoulder and took off running. I remember yelling something, but I didn't stop to check if he was right behind me. My chest was pounding, and all I could think about was getting out of those trees. We sprinted down the path, stumbling over roots and swatting branches out of our way. I was gasping by the time I finally burst out of the woods. I leaned against a thick tree near the edge of the park, trying to catch my breath. About half a minute later, Kyle came running out too. He was just as winded, looking around like he had no idea what had just happened. I told him what I saw, and he went pale. He said that partway out, he had stopped for a second to rest and heard something running behind him. He swore he saw a shape darting through the woods, moving fast but somehow slow at the same time. I didn't ask what he meant by that. I didn't want to know. Even now, years later, we still talk about it sometimes. Neither of us has an explanation. All I know is that something was in those trees, and it didn't want us there. Whether that trail is cursed, haunted, or just bad land, I couldn't say. But it made itself very clear that day. This happened when I was around 14. It's been years now, but the memories still make my skin crawl. I'm uneasy in the dark almost everywhere because of what happened in that house. I worry that something like it could happen again. One afternoon, my father decided he wanted to bring in a spiritualist to try and contact family members who had passed away. My mom didn't agree with the idea at all. At the time, I actually thought it was something that might help. I wanted to feel connected to certain relatives we had lost. When I was about 7, I once woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, completely shaken, but I didn't know why. I stayed awake for over an hour with a feeling of dread I couldn't explain. It felt like something terrible was going to happen. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, though I didn't want to. That next morning, I was told that my uncle had died unexpectedly in a bizarre accident. I started sobbing right away. I felt physically sick. It wasn't just that he had passed. It was also that I felt something was coming. I just didn't know what it was. I hadn't said anything to anyone, which made it worse. I carried guilt like I had caused it, even though I knew deep down that wasn't logical. Years later, I found out the time I had woken up in panic was just about when he died. That was when I started connecting the pieces. That wasn't the only strange moment like that. When I was 11, right before Valentine's Day, my school day was all treats and movies. It should have been a happy time, but I felt off, sad, watched, like I didn't belong. I had no idea why. After school, my mom came to pick us up. My twin sister was with me as always, but instead of going home, we were told we were going to visit our grandma. That wasn't normal. We usually only went there on weekends. I asked my mom what was going on. She didn't say anything, just kept her eyes on the road, occasionally glancing at me in the mirror. Just before we turned onto Grandma Street, I swear I heard my grandfather's voice. He whispered my name. He had been in the hospital fighting advanced spine cancer that had reached his brain. Right then, I knew. He was gone. I held back tears because I wasn't totally sure and didn't want to imagine it. My sister didn't sense anything and didn't seem to know. I stayed quiet. When we got to the house, my dad met us at the door. He looked devastated. He confirmed it. Grandpa had passed. It was hard on all of us. For me, it was a mix of grief and calm. I felt like Grandpa didn't want us to mourn too deeply. He had suffered so much, and now he could finally rest. My dad noticed I wasn't crying and asked if I was okay. I told him I already knew. Everyone stared at me like I was speaking another language, except for Mom. Dad wanted to know who had told me, and I said no one had. I just felt it. I explained how I'd heard his voice and the way I'd felt all day. Dad didn't buy it. He stared at Mom like she'd let something slip. But then he asked my sister if she had known, and she was just as surprised as everyone else. That proved Mom hadn't said a word. 3 months later, I had a vivid dream about Grandpa. I hadn't seen him in person for more than 6 months before he passed. I truly believe that dream was his way of saying a proper goodbye. That was one of the biggest reasons I agreed when Dad said he was bringing someone to help us connect with spirits. I wanted peace. But my mom wouldn't let me or any of my siblings be in the house during the session. She said it wasn't safe and it wouldn't be good for us. I didn't get it at the time, but now I know she was absolutely right. I begged her over and over to let me have my own reading, but she wouldn't budge. In the end, I'm glad I didn't get that chance. What came afterward was bad enough. I can't imagine how much worse it could have been if I had gone through with it. After the medium visited, things were quiet for a little while, but then, maybe 2 weeks later, we had an overwhelming swarm of flies on the second story of the house. Specifically, the kitchen window, just that one. They clung to the window screen. There had to be hundreds of them. Big ones too, almost the size of beetles. They were so loud they sounded like cicadas buzzing. We had no clue where they came from. It was like they appeared out of thin air. By the next morning, most were dead and the rest were gone. We didn't think much of it then, just that it was weird. But looking back, I'm convinced that was the day something opened. A door to something else. Maybe that's when the portal came to life. After that, the house changed. I started seeing and hearing things. It began with the shadow in the corner of my bedroom. Tall, dark shape, easily 8 feet tall. Its head nearly touched the top of the doorframe. It would only appear when the lights were off, like it didn't want to be seen. But I knew it was there, even when I couldn't see it directly. When it wasn't there, the light from the hallway would shine into my room. When it was there, the light was blocked. That's how I could always tell. But more than that, I could feel it. Watching me, it was angry, and I think it hated that I could see it. It didn't want me there. It wanted me gone. My dreams turned dark. Constant nightmares. I heard shouting in them, deep and furious. Someone screaming, "Leave! Get out!" Trying to protect myself, I hid a small wooden cross under my bed, one my grandfather had given me. But things got worse. After a few nights, the cross vanished. I tore my room apart looking for it. Pulled my bed, my dresser, even the carpet edges. Nothing. It was just gone. After that, the dark figure didn't stay just in my room. Followed me. I catch it in my peripheral vision, just behind my shoulder. No matter where I went inside that house. That's when sleep paralysis started. I couldn't move. My eyes would be open, but it would take nearly a full minute before I could twitch a finger. It started happening often enough that I learned a routine to break free as fast as I could. One evening while I was doing dishes, I noticed something strange. The corner of my right eye went black, like a blind spot. I shifted to look, and the dark figure was right there, just inches away. Panicked, I spun around and screamed at it, told it to leave, demanded answers. But as soon as I turned, it was gone. My yelling brought my mom rushing in from the backyard. She asked what was going on. I made up some weak excuse. She didn't buy it, but she didn't press. Looking back, I should have told her. Maybe she could have helped. But at the time, I thought she'd think I was losing it. I barely believed it myself. Oddly, after that moment, the dark figure stayed distant, but always within view. I saw it in mirrors, TV screens, anything that reflected. The layout of the house made it easy to see from one end to the other, even upstairs. But the worst hadn't happened yet. That started when something began copying my sister. I know now it's something people call a mimic. The first time, I saw her walk from the stairs into the living room with her music blaring. Nothing strange there, but when I went to speak to her, she wasn't there. I called her. She said she was with our mom at the doctor's office. Another time, I was talking to her in my bedroom. She sprayed one of those strong air fresheners and we kept chatting. Then I heard something at the door. I turned, and there she was again, spraying the same can, repeating the exact same words. I told her she'd already done that. She said I was imagining things. But I know what I saw. That one still freaks me out the most. The most terrifying experience came when I was home alone with our 3 dogs. I was in my room and heard heavy footsteps upstairs. I grabbed the wooden bat we kept by the front door and called one of the dogs, a pit mix who stuck to me like glue. We searched the upstairs together. Every room, every closet, nothing. I figured I must have imagined it and headed back downstairs. That's when I heard a crash. The dogs went nuts. I ran into the living room. The dogs had formed a circle around something on the floor. Their fur was on end, barking wildly. In the center was a coffee cup, not broken, just sitting there, the liquid inside still spinning. I picked it up, confused. I turned to walk to the sink, and that's when the stairwell door slammed shut behind me. It had never shut all the way before. That was enough. I dropped the cup into the sink, scooped up the dogs, and bolted outside onto the deck. I sat there, shaking, not wanting to go back in. I felt like if I stayed even 1 minute longer, something was going to harm me. We moved out 2 years later. My dad stayed in the house a while longer with his new girlfriend. He said they had some strange things happen, but nothing close to what I'd gone through. After we moved, I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he never would have hired the spiritualist if he'd known what would come of it. From what I hear, no one stays in that house very long anymore. That makes me believe the doorway is still open. Since leaving, I haven't had sleep paralysis or dark dreams. Not once. I don't think the portal was ever closed. Not properly. Here's what I've learned. Never invite something like that into your home. You have no way of knowing what might answer. Or who. When I was a lot younger, I had an old friend I used to hang out with often. He lived in one of those vintage houses in our old neighborhood, dark wood framing around doors and windows, basement walls made of stone, and always a strange, too quiet vibe. Something about the place always felt a bit off to me, but I didn't really have the words for it back then. 2 things happened there that stuck with me, both leaving behind a heavy feeling that I still carry. The first thing I remember happened while my friend and I were playing in the main room of his house. There was an old portrait hanging near the front entrance. I had seen it many times, but that day, for no real reason, I couldn't stop staring at it. The image was of a young boy on a wooden rocking horse. He had one hand resting on the handle and the other raised near his head, smiling oddly. Something didn't look right. Then I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A small bulge in the painting's surface, right where his raised hand was. It was shaped almost exactly like a knife. It wasn't painted on. It looked like an actual raised blister in the varnish, oddly perfect in size and placement. I pointed it out to my friend, and we both stared at it for a long time. I figured it was maybe some kind of strange damage from age, but it was too clear to be random. My friend just shrugged and said something like, "Strange things happen here all the time. I'm used to it." That line stuck with me more than it should have, but I tried not to let it scare me. My mom picked me up later and I went home, not thinking I'd dwell on it again. But the next day, when I went back over, the shape was gone. Totally gone. The bubble had vanished like it was never there to begin with. But even worse, the boy in the painting didn't have that weird grin anymore. His face was totally blank, almost like a still photo of someone who didn't want to be there. I have no way to explain it, but I've never been able to forget how that whole thing made me feel. A couple years later, when I was around 16, I ended up watching over the same house one evening. I was sitting on the couch, watching a show with the youngest sibling, just keeping them company. Then, out of nowhere, the doors upstairs started slamming shut, one after the other. Slam, slam, slam. It wasn't a breeze or anything like that. It felt planned, like someone was walking down the hallway shutting each one with purpose. Normally, I'd be the first to leave when something spooky happens. I scare easy. But I couldn't just ditch the kid I was looking after. So I took a deep breath and walked upstairs, flipping on every light I passed. But when I got there, all the doors were wide open. Every single one. Like nothing had happened. I felt a little better until I noticed the dog. The family's dog was standing by the front door, not moving, just staring through the glass like it saw something outside. Its ears were back and it started to let out this low, shaky growl. It wasn't mad, it was scared. That's when I noticed the basement door. There's a small glass panel on that door that lines up perfectly with a basement window facing the yard. For some reason, my eyes went right to it. And that's when I saw it. A boy's face, just the head. Not someone crouching or leaning in, but a single face, hovering, eyes tilted upward like his body was buried in the ground and only the head remained. And then it vanished. Not moved, just disappeared like it was never there at all. I was frozen. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely think. And somehow I couldn't shake the thought. The boy from the painting had come back. After that, I stopped going to that house. That sense of something being wrong never left me. It wasn't just my friend and his family who stayed there. Even now, I still find myself wondering who or what was really living inside that place. Growing up in the Blue Ridge Hills, I was always warned about the older trails. Some were known and safe, well-walked paths that led to scenic spots. Others, my uncle used to say, were left alone for a reason. When I was 17, my buddies and I chose to cut across one of those forgotten trails to reach our campsite before sundown. It was covered in brush and barely looked like a trail anymore, but we kept going, laughing off my uncle's old stories. The further we hiked, the quieter the woods became. Birds went silent. Even the sound of leaves moving in the breeze seemed to stop. Then we noticed the marks. Symbols had been carved into the trunks of trees, some recent, some worn by time. Circles, spirals, and odd figures with stretched out limbs. None of us knew what they meant, but all the carvings seemed to point one way, deeper into the woods. By the time we realized we'd gone off track, the sun had already dropped behind the hills. That's when we first heard the voices. At first, they sounded like wind passing through branches. But the longer we stood there, the clearer the whispers became, like people murmuring just beyond where our flashlights reached. We yelled out, half thinking it might be someone playing a prank. But nobody replied. Only more whispers came, circling us. We started to panic. When we tried to head back the way we'd come, everything looked off. The trail was tighter, darker. The carvings had changed. Now they showed people with empty eyes and wide, open mouths. Then we saw them, tall, skinny figures standing between the trees. Hard to see clearly, like they shifted if you looked too long. One of them stepped closer. My friend yelled and took off running. We all ran after him, crashing through the brush with no idea which way to go. The whispers turned to laughter, twisted and cruel, echoing all around us. Somehow, we burst out of the woods and onto a dirt road. The trail we'd come through, gone. No break in the trees. No sign it had ever been there. My friend was never quite right after that night. He quit talking to our group and moved to another state the next summer. I tried to forget it. Just last week, I was hiking near a cabin I rented with my girlfriend, Megan. I spotted something carved into a tree near the trail behind the cabin. It was one of those same symbols, and under it, scratched deep into the bark, was something that looked like my name. I don't think we were meant to leave the forest that night, and I don't think they've stopped following. A few nights later, I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was the usual nighttime stuff, the wind, maybe an animal, or the house creaking. But then I heard that same whispering again, right outside the window. I stayed still, barely breathed. Megan slept beside me, unaware. I slowly turned my head, heart racing. Through the thin curtain, I could make out a tall shape standing just inside the treeline. Watching, I shut my eyes tight and told myself it wasn't real, just a dream. The next morning, I found strange prints near the cabin. They were long, odd-shaped, like they didn't belong to anything natural, but were trying to look human. The dirt around a nearby tree had been disturbed, and carved into the trunk was a new message. I didn't tell Megan. I didn't want to frighten her, and I had no idea what it meant. We packed up and left before nightfall. I hope I never hear those whispers again.